at the end of time.
O'clock.
Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Wednesday night yet again. Seems like it was just Wednesday.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if
Week
that
doesn't take long.
Although I don't know if that's true because it's like I don't even remember what we did last week's show about. Well, a lot of stuff has happened in the interim, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know we did one on Bass Reeves, but I think that was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember what the one we did. What was the one what show we did last week? No, I don't remember. Oh well, I guess it doesn't matter.
I forgot what it was.
I forgot what it was too. Oh my god. Zach, this is very early in the show, but Zach says in the chat, so guess who has 2 thumbs and has chlamydia? Do you really? Do you seriously have chlamydia? How did that happen? I didn't know people got chlamydia anymore. I guess it's still around.
Yeah. That's some weird shit.
This guy. Not me. I mean, I don't have chlamydia. Not that I know of, but you know what I mean. Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Two thumbs and chlamydia. Maybe it's his cat.
No, anytime anybody says that, they mean this guy.
Okay.
That's what that means. I
You
didn't
need to
know.
stay out of them damn gay bathhouses, bro.
That's what happened. That's what happened.
Those dudes got foreskins, man. Shit peels back, man. Got that cheese up in there.
Gross. Oh my
Yeah.
god. We're like less than
Impregnate
5
your
minutes
booty with that fucking
into
cottage
the
cheese.
show.
Yeah, it's nasty.
5 minutes into the show. We're already
Yeah.
talking about chlamydia. Thanks a lot. But
Yeah. Stop fucking with them fucking dirty ass dudes at the fucking Korea bathhouse.
Oh Lord. So yeah. I mean, he likes Jewish guys though, so they don't have
Yeah.
foreskins.
Well, they're circumcised, yeah.
Yeah,
But
so-
you know how he is. He'll jump on any dick he comes across.
Cameron says 2 minutes. We can't even make it 2
I know,
minutes.
man.
We can't even make it 2 minutes.
I know, and I'm not even drunk yet.
We're the worst.
I'm not even drunk yet.
Seriously. I understand why people don't want to watch us.
That's why they don't like the show.
No, I'm just kidding. Hey, if they don't like it, that's their prerogative.
I remember when we were new, we lost one of our first subscribers because this is a great show. I can sit here and listen to this with my kids. And I said, no, you can't.
No.
This show's rated R.
I would
like,
not.
No, please do not do that. And then
I would not
That was like by
suggest.
fucking show 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost that one. He's like,
I would not
hell
suggest
no.
that. We can't.
You can't have a G-rated show. You won't get any viewers.
Well, and I
And
can't,
that's
and
not
I
us.
and I wouldn't be able to do
Yeah,
that
yeah,
anyway.
that's
It's
not
like
us,
I would
yeah.
just be sitting there reading robotically off a script
Yeah.
and not be
Yeah.
able to talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ian England says, haha, I fucking love this shit. I know, right? But yeah.
That's because he's always tricking me into talking about you man whores. Early.
Yeah. Like
I'm happy to talk about man whores, though. I'll fucking talk about man whores. You guys give me super chats, I'll talk about man whores. That's what it is.
Zach said he didn't get it from the bathhouse.
He didn't get it from the bathhouse?
Ironically, got it from a grinder hookup.
Okay, then stay off them fucking apps.
Okay. See, so it was the apps. It's the internet's fault.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Say, luckily I got some pills from the
fucking
the
gay
cootie
apps
doc
those
to
gay-
get rid of it. The cootie doc. I
Those
love that you
gay
have a
apps are
cootie
worse
doctor.
than any bathhouse. That's the fucking, that's fucking STD Central. Fucking, you see.
I want to start an app called STD Central.
Yeah, STD Central.
There's got to be a fetish.
See,
for
I
that
can fucking
somewhere.
market name anything. Jenny fucking loves the titles. I fucking did a lot of the titles for the books that we did and everything that we kind of produced together and everything. Because I got that fucking P.T. Barnum. I'm selling sizzle. I'm not just selling steak.
Yeah.
So I'll just come up with a fucking badass title for something like STD Central. That should be the name of a fucking gay hookup app.
I mean, it
Big time.
definitely should. That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people would just join it just because the name
Yeah.
was funny.
Meet
I mean,
the
I
meat.
would, and I'm
Yeah.
a bisexual straight-ish woman. You know what I mean? So I would join it just because the name was funny.
Yeah.
Just because.
Women would be on there. They just like to watch gay dudes fuck.
Well, yeah. Who doesn't?
Yeah, that's what they do.
I mean, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, girls do like to
A
watch.
lot of
gay
straight dudes
fuck.
don't understand it, man. Girls are rubbing it out to the gay porn.
That's true.
They're not looking at fucking dudes, fucking women. They don't really care about that.
Nah, not really. I mean, some do, but
Well, straight porn is always focusing on the women. The women don't care about that.
no, not
Women
really.
are fucking want something. The shot is focusing on the dudes.
Or, well, it's not so much that. It's just, I don't know, because I like lesbian porn too, but...
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's a different situation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because if they focus on the dude that's doing the work in the straight porn, man, that dude doesn't look good. He's just a stunt dick.
Yeah. Nobody really
No
likes
personality. Very rarely do they have a personality. They don't let them have personalities. They're interchangeable. You don't know who that is.
Zach says, or straight girls are rubbing it out to maggots, apparently. Yeah, we're
that girl.
talking about Blowfly Girl like we were talking about on the Friday show.
Yeah.
Gordon says, animal print is a great look on you, Jenny. Thank you very much. Or any female for that matter. Yeah, that's just, he got it, and it just came today. So I was trying it on. Look, it has like a metal.
It's got a metal
like, cross on it.
Metal cross on it with a red cross behind
That's metal, and then it's like a red.
Go ahead and give him a free titty drop.
No, I'm not doing that, Tom.
Right.
This is a
tried,
completely
guys.
different.
I tried to break you all off. I tried to hook you up, but she wouldn't have it.
Dude.
She wouldn't have it. Well, we get demonetized.
Well, that, and it's just like, dude, I did like so much research for this show, and all you care about is titty drops. That's like so depressing.
I'm trying to please the straight crowd and the gay crowd.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, just all dudes. Women don't give a shit. This is dudes.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. I got them both in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I can see
got
them
both in there.
Gordon says, have Ariel do a titty drop. Yeah.
She's on the couch.
Yeah, she's in the other room. We got her a new wig.
Got her all kinds of shit. Got her some slut shoes.
It's pink. Although it's pretty, I kind of want to wear it.
Yeah, the pink wig. Pink wig with big ponytails.
Yeah, I might wear it.
It fits her because she's drawn like a cartoon anyway.
Yeah, so it kind of makes her look like a cartoon character. Yeah. I dig it though. I'm just like, I might just like.
We'll bring her out.
I'm gonna wear that.
We'll bring her out Friday. We'll put her back there.
Yeah.
Legs up in the air.
You know.
She's got slut shoes on and those little ankle socks that have the fucking ruffles, like back in the 80s, like an 80s porn.
Yeah.
She got that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Zach says, does Ariel fit in the washing machine?
No.
I don't think she would fit in the washing machine.
No, and I'll tell you what, man, taking care of that thing is like it's like taking care of a fucking like a paraplegic or paralyzed person. She's just fucking dead weight. You got to constantly keep it clean. It changes colors just by resting up against things. Its skin just absorbs dye from anything, so she's got to be sitting on a white sheet. She's got to have white clothes on for the most part.
I mean, for a while, like until because the stuff that she's made out of, it does something called outgassing. Yeah. So she's kind of like sticky for a little while. Yeah, so she gets cat hair on her.
Yeah.
And
anything lint.
Anything that is dyed a color.
Yeah.
Like if she sits too long on it or wears it too long.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get it off with like it's like some kind of acne cream.
Benzoyl peroxide.
Benzoyl peroxide, like acne cream. But yeah, it's like it's a whole thing. It's like care and maintenance.
Yeah.
So it's like
you can't put her in a.
At least we don't have to feed her.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
You can't put her in a bathtub. You can't submerge it.
Yeah.
So everything's got to be washed by hand with damp towels and fucking.
Yeah.
And then you can't use any kind of solvents on her or anything, you know.
Yeah.
What she's made out of is a pretty delicate material. I actually think she's a little too soft, too jelly-like. She needs to be a little bit harder than that, but that's what they went with. When she's powdered, it does feel like skin.
Yeah, but you have to keep baby powder on.
Yeah, you keep baby powder on.
So, like I said, it doesn't get too sticky.
Jim was abusing it a couple days ago.
Well, we had to try it out.
Yeah, she fucked that doll up, man.
I didn't fuck it up.
Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Tammy says Ariel's more high maintenance than a real woman.
Kinda, yeah.
I mean, kinda. Because she can't do anything for herself.
She's expensive, so you don't.
Well, like I said,
you don't want to ruin it, you know, and get it.
Yeah, she costs a lot of money. That's the only thing. So you don't want like her skin discoloring and shit like that. But yeah,
she tends to want to get gray around the feet. Yeah. If the feet were touching the carpet, everything just sticks to it. It just absorbs fucking dyes and dirt and shit. I guess it's dirt, and then getting it off of there, it takes forever because it's real porous.
Yeah, but that's supposed to go away after.
About 6 months, it kind of calms down.
Yeah, like it doesn't.
They don't outgas as much. The material's giving off all these gases and oils.
Yeah, when it's new. So there's that. You know, care and feeding of sex dolls.
Yeah, well, it's a high-end sex doll
on the show. What it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zach said, I say just let her go multicolor and just say you have her tattoos. Like she gets tattoos.
Well, you can tattoo them.
Yeah, well, you could put like fake tattoos on.
Fake tattoos, yeah. I'm gonna get some on her.
Allison said she's taking notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of a lot. And like I said, Tom bought her own clothes and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Shoes.
Wigs.
Shoes and wigs, mostly.
Yeah. Although the wigs, I can wear those too.
Yeah.
I can't wear the shoes because they're too
Right.
small. But most of the clothes you bought her, I can wear too.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I mean. Zach said, Jenny, I can see the gears turning in your head about an evil sex doll horror story. I'm sure that's been done. I mean, it has to have been. I thought it would creep me out because for a while we kept her sitting in like the chair, like in the corner of our bedroom, but it didn't bother me. Like every now and then, like I'd forget and I'd walk into the bedroom and be like, "Ooh, who's that?" Oh yeah, that's right. But it didn't freak me out, like waking me up in the middle of the night. Yeah, like I didn't like wake up and be like, "Oh my god, it's a person," or it wasn't like that.
It's like any other toy.
Yeah, it wasn't really that big a deal. I don't think of her like a real person.
Yeah.
So, not yet anyway. Like, I don't know if we might at some point. Like, we've had her a long time. I don't think we will, though.
I don't think they last that long.
She doesn't come
I think you're
across
lucky
like
to get
a
4 or 5 years out.
real person, you know what I mean? But yeah, so after
just an
all,
action figure. And a piece of artwork, really.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we look at it. But yeah, so this show right here, I can't tell you how happy I am. I have had this topic on my list for such a long time because I love doing shit about stupid pseudoscience.
Yeah.
And it's just really fun to me. I still want to do a creationist show too. And it's like I kept putting it in the polls and it never won, but this week it won overwhelmingly and I was so happy. And just like usual, I always kind of feel like I know a little bit about these kind of... I knew about phrenology, a little bit about it, because a long time ago, I read a book, and I think I still have it around here somewhere, by Stephen Jay Gould, who was a very famous... I mean, he died many years ago, probably like in 2002. But he was I think he's a paleontologist. And he... very famous in popular science circles. He wrote tons and tons of books, and he wrote this great book in 1981, which I have, called "The Mismeasure of Man." And it wasn't specifically about phrenology, but it was about that kind of thing. It was about this kind of scientific, like particularly like after the Enlightenment era, like 18th, 19th century, where scientists were trying to essentially codify racism and stuff like that through science, you know what I mean? So biological determinism, that kind of stuff. So the book was like about that, and he did talk about phrenology quite a bit in it. And he actually did some experiments with a dude named Morton, who we'll talk about a little bit later, but with his skull measurements, he's trying to prove that like white peoples are better than non-white peoples because their skulls are bigger and blah blah blah. So there was that whole thing, and he kind of showed that was not correct and that maybe there was some bias going on. But it's a great book. They did another edition of it in 1996, I want to say, because he wanted to say something about the bell curve, which had just come out, and he kind of debunked that. But like I said, Stephen Jay Gould died in 2002, but he wrote a lot of really good books. I have a bunch of them like around here somewhere, but I remember reading this one. I think that was where I first kind of heard about phrenology, like for the first time. And the scary thing about it is that it seems like just this kind of weird, wacky Victorian era silly science thing. I guess it was pre-Victorian era.
Basically, when you get down to it, it's judging people by how they look, which
But yeah,
that can work. Like if you look at a person, you say that person's inbred. You know they're inbred. They're going to have symptoms of inbreeding. Best, just go look at some of the Appalachian families, like the most inbred family in Appalachia. They're there on YouTube. They don't look right. So looks does determine certain things, but not always.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't... well, we'll let Jen get more into it. I mean, it's just kind of... if a person is short, they're not going to be a really good runner or jumper. That's just not what they're built for, So you can judge, It's just... Should you? You shouldn't really discriminate.
Well, and the thing about phrenology and, it's kind of... similar thing, physiognomy, which is kind of the same thing, but determining people's personality traits by their facial features. rather than their skull bumps, is that they're basically it's kind of like palm reading, really, is what it's similar to, because they're telling you your entire personality based on the shape of your skull or the shape of your nose or something like that.
Yeah,
which
that's just an inheritable trait.
There is no empirical evidence that supports any of that. But the thing that's interesting about phrenology in particular is that even though it is wrong, 100% wrong, it actually, in its early days, it did actually contribute to science in a positive way. It did some bad shit too. Not that the guy that came up with it intended that, I don't think. But it was actually instrumental, even though it's wrong, in, for example, the understanding we have today of how the brain functions, neurology and stuff. So it was kind of like an early baby step in that direction. So it's not all bad, even though it's completely wrong.
Usually stuff like this from this era is something that came out of basically animal breeding. And, Europeans and Chinese, too, had been breeding animals for fucking thousands of years. Starting off with horses and cattle, dogs, And people wanted to know, they didn't understand how things were inherited because they didn't know about DNA.
Right.
They just knew that offspring looked like the parents. And that applied for animals and humans, because you might get very upset if I tell you this, humans are animals. I've trained them both. I've trained animals and humans. It's very similar.
Yeah, I don't think that's a controversial
They got
statement.
some people that don't believe that. But no, you're an animal. All right, and there's really
creationists get offended, but I don't think anyone else does.
And really, there's nothing different between you and other animals.
Not much, really.
You're all operating off the same drive.
The same hardware.
Yeah, it is
essentially.
It's
we have a little bit more of it.
Your main motive, really, behind everything is the pain-pleasure principle. You move towards pleasure and move away from pain. That is a fucking constant throughout the entire animal kingdom, because that's what you're set up to do. And you can train animals with that. Through behavior modification.
Yeah.
Humans too. Military training is just that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically pain-pleasure based stuff. And trauma-based fucking mind control, depattering the mind. It's just breaking old habits through trauma. Psychological and physical trauma. Usually the psychological and physical trauma, if you're doing it against a human, it's work to make them work. You run. You failed, so you run. Keep running. Keep working. And they don't want to do the work anymore until you just have to live it to understand it. But cults use the same thing. So I say the military's a cult.
Yeah, Ben said it was about detecting criminals and those prone to criminality and vice. That was actually true, but you know what? That wasn't the first intention. That actually happened in the second wave of it, like in the early 20th century. Like, because it kind of came about in the early to mid 1800s, and they used it a little bit for that, but not much. I think that was more later on when, criminology started getting bigger, like at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century.
Yeah.
That's when it started getting real big, like, oh, you have a criminal skull or whatever.
Yeah, you look like a criminal, so you're a criminal.
So you're a criminal, let's hang you.
That doesn't work.
Okay. No, it does not.
Just because you look like the criminals doesn't mean you're the guilty one.
That's what I mean. And it's like, that's why this kind of stuff is so pernicious, because as Ben also points out, which I want to get into toward the end of the show, physiognomy has become popular again in the transvestigation community. Yeah, and there's a bunch of girlies on TikTok who are doing quote-unquote face reading, which is essentially physiognomy, where they're saying they can tell your entire personality from what your face looks like. And it seems kind of harmless at the set, but it's also kind of a little bit racist, I saw. So there's that going on too. But it's a huge fucking thing on TikTok, which is disappointing. But there we go.
It's not scientific to reverse engineer. If you're in the United States, you look at the offender profiles, you look at who's in prison. Basically, the offenders are low-income teenage black males. That's a lot. That's a lot of them. Most of them that's the offender profile. Just because if you look like that doesn't mean you're a criminal, though. Because there's a lot of good black people. Most black people are not in prison. Most black people are not criminals.
Well, most people are not in prison.
Yes.
So it's just so, and well, that's
you can't
like
back engineer it based upon. Well, let's
Right.
find out who's in prison, and if people look like that, then they're the criminals.
and that's exactly the kind of problem that plagued this science from the
Right.
beginning. And I'm gonna say that phrenology, even though it was big and like super popular, especially like in the early to mid 1800s, like massive, and it was massive in the US too. Oh, they took to it like fucking duck to water over here, but like in a kind of pop psychology kind of way. But the thing about it is that it was, one, as Black Tie points out, used to confirm prejudice big time. There was a lot of that going on, which we'll discuss later on. But it was also kind of like they started out just observing something like, well, this, you know, we work in a mental asylum and these people have a couple people that are quote unquote insane have bumps on their heads. So that must mean insane people have bumps on their heads. And that's what, you know what I mean? So it was just kind of like not great science. And even at the time in the 19th century, a bunch of other scientists came out and said, this is obviously bullshit.
Of course it's bullshit.
So, yeah, so even at the time,
Yeah.
a lot of people were calling it a pseudoscience in the 19th century.
Just because you find bumps on the heads of some of the people in the insane asylum doesn't mean you found anything. You got to go out and find out how many bumps are on the heads of the people that aren't in the insane asylum. Just people walking around. How many of them have bumps on your head? You're going to find out shit ton of them have bumps on their head.
Of course.
And then you're going to find out, well, shit, only 1% of these people with bumps on their heads are in the insane asylum.
Of course.
So it doesn't mean anything. It's got to be...
It's a confirmation
The data
bias
has to be correct.
is what it is.
Science doesn't science that way.
No.
Statistics, bitch.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
And well, the thing about it, and I kind of feel like in the early days of Enlightenment era science, when you had people that weren't maybe not trained as scientists, because there wasn't really a thing like that in those days, so you just have these kind of wealthy dabblers, sort of, and they would observe something interesting, which is good. That's the first sign. But then they would extrapolate something really complicated from kind of a small sample size.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. People associate science with these universities. That's not where science came from. That's not where mechanical engineering came from. A lot of that stuff came from the noble class, at least in Western Europe and Europe. The noble class, they had enough leisure time. These rich, they had money, these rich guys. They'd sit around and read other people's books and write books and do things like, you know, try to make mechanical things like new sights on cannons or come up with these weird theories, you know. It wasn't coming out of universities. Science was kind of a rich man thing. Now, eventually it did.
Yeah. And there was some crossover.
Right.
It wasn't that, you know, there was some, like, that was coming a lot.
When we think of a university, really what we're talking about is, in the American mind, a university is really something that came from England, you know. That was because that's what we copied the system against. Like Isaac Newton he was in a university. But the thing is, though, is that a lot of the universities, if you go back, you know, to the Renaissance time when they first appeared, there were periods where there wasn't any fucking science going on in there. They were just hotbeds of religious fundamentalism. So just because it was a university didn't necessarily mean it was science going on. Some of that shit was crazy that they were talking about.
Well, and especially in this era, there was a lot of, because the religious worldview was still so prevalent, you know, you had a lot of people that were super, super religious, as most early scientists were, that coming up with some crazy fucking shit.
Yeah,
like
well, some of the people in those universities that weren't even scientists at all. They were just in there talking about how many angels could dance on the fucking head of a pig.
I was going to say
they were
exactly
doing fucking
that.
religious shit, but they had real scientists. They just weren't in universities.
Yeah.
They were at home talking to other scientists, basically doing Frankenstein stuff. What was his name? Fucking Victor Frankenstein. You just stay in your castle and you do mad scientist experiments and read and write to other scientists. They weren't in university.
Be like, what do you think about this, bro?
Right. So there were certain periods, and that happened on and off over the centuries. Sometimes universities were just smart people weren't in there. The smart people were.
Well, like I said, there's
solo.
a lot of crossover, and Ben said, rightly so, that Newton was indeed in a university, also the Royal Society. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but
Isaac Newton was.
Yeah, but he was in a time when scientists could be in a university. There was other times.
And the thing about it too is that Isaac Newton. I'd love to do a show about Isaac Newton actually, because he is a fascinating person.
And he was religious, very religious.
He was very religious, and he believed in alchemy.
Yeah, yeah.
So it just goes to show that as much of a genius as he was,
yeah, he could be a genius.
Everybody has blind spots, and everybody has, not necessarily that, because it's just everyone is kind of a product of the time and the culture that they grow up in also.
I had to fucking bring up pictures of my granddad, my mother's dad. All right. He worked for fucking NASA. He worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He worked for fucking McDonnell Douglas, Grumman, General Atomics. He worked on a lot of fucking secret projects. He was a fucking genius. He was a aerospace engineer. He was also a fundamentalist Christian, and like a weird one that wouldn't have television in the house, and real strict. And really, that's who they were looking for back in those days, because they wouldn't sell any secrets to the communists. They were real religious, and that's who they were looking for at that time. So just and the shit that he believed fucking on a religious level was fucking nuts. But he could do an entire fuel injection system, fucking explosive bolts on the fucking Saturn V project. All that shit, he did all that shit. He was working on that damn atomic rocket. I got photos of him downstairs running around. So just because you're a scientist and you're a genius, that doesn't mean you're not wrong.
You know what's interesting?
They got a lot of shit that they believe is wrong.
You know what's interesting to me? Is that, because I read a lot about the, I got real interested in the evolution versus creationism thing years ago. Interestingly, the creationists will come out and be like, oh, well, our scientist says, because they do have some scientists that are on their side or creationists. Interestingly, almost all of them are engineers.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like, you don't have any creationist paleontologists who are not from, like, reputable
engineers,
universities.
It's numbers.
It's almost all engineers.
Because it's numbers.
Or, like, dentists and shit like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or physicians. It's not anything. It's not anything that where their specialty is evolutionary biology or paleontology.
Well, yeah,
or
Isaac Newton was the same way. He invented calculus. Fucking invented all this fucking the science. Okay, a lot of high level mathematics. But he believed in alchemy and angels and all that. Yeah. So,
and I think back then they didn't
about that
really see that as a contradiction.
No, there's no contradiction in there. Yeah.
Which is interesting to me.
No.
Because absolutely, most people now would see that as a contradiction.
I think guys like that, and I think my granddad also, they saw the rules of the universe and all those numbers and all that pure logic as an act of God. That's what God worked.
Yeah, I can see that.
That it was laws of God.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I was coming at it too. I think that's probably why that.
Right. They thought God was just pure logic and power.
Right. Which that's more understandable. Like I said, it doesn't seem like, talking about creationism, like any of the scientists they have on their side are generally, as far as I know, maybe there's a couple outliers, but there's not any whose specialty is evolutionary biology, paleontology, anything like that, a relevant thing to
I think
evolution.
Another thing that used to get, like, because my granddad on that side, he believed in all those miracles. And miracles, of course, are fantastical. But I think because he understood physics so well, and mechanics, he assumes that these stories are true. So therefore, man, if that happened, then there's a lot of power in that story. That's he's probably trying to figure out what laws of physics were broken. You know what I mean? So it might be more impressive to a guy who is real scientific and religious. Like, oh man, fucking God must be super powerful if he broke fucking all these thermodynamic laws. It's something like that.
Interestingly, I think it might have been. I think it was somebody, like, he was a rather famous scientist who wrote a lot of popular. It might have been Martin Gardner, but I could be totally wrong about that. And he was, I don't remember what kind of scientist he was, but he was, I believe he was a mathematician. Now, he was what he called, and please forgive me if it wasn't Martin Gardner, but I thought it was. He called himself a fideist, meaning that he believed in God and religion because he wanted to, or he just felt it. He knew that there was no evidence for it. He knew that there was, but it made him feel better, and so he was able to compartmentalize. But he was aware that he was compartmentalizing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I always thought was kind of strange because I was like, why bother? But it made him feel better, so I wasn't gonna argue.
Ben's down there fucking talking shit. Your granddad worked on an atomic rocket on your basement. No, he lived out in California at the time, and he was a subcontractor, and he was working for defense industries. And one of the ones he worked with for a while was one called General Atomics, and they were building a rocket. It was an external combustion nuclear rocket program. It was called Project. Do you remember what I've talked about it before? It was called Project. All it was a fucking glorified fucking Coke bottle machine. It could fucking throw little like soup cans out the back of it, like 3 of them a second. And in there was some nuclear material, and it would fucking detonate once it passed a fucking ring of magnets. And it would go out in the back and blow up in the back of the ship, and it just had a big old fucking steel plate in the back, and it would, on shock absorbers, it would push the rocket up, and the rocket would leave and go out into the fucking atmosphere riding on a fucking burning white fucking plume of fucking atomic plasma. And then once it got out into space, it was chilled out more, and it was about 20 or 30 stories tall. It weighed like a fucking building. The heavier it was, the safer it was. It was made out of steel and fucking concrete. It was super heavy. And once it was up there, it could get to fucking like Jupiter in a month. That's how fast it was. And they'd flip it around, and it would slow down. And they were doing it without computers. I'll remember what it was called, but it was declassified, I think, back in the 90s. But I didn't hear about it from him. I heard about it from my uncle. His son told me about it.
Yeah, Camp Guy said the Hubble Deep Field and James Webb Space Telescope Deep Field images show millions or billions of galaxies out there. Yeah, it's just... I don't... religion to me has always seemed very provincial, especially as we learn more and more about the cosmos. It just seems like some shit we made up. You know what I mean? It's just... there's nothing wrong with it. It's just little stories we made up because we didn't understand it. But now we understand it. It's like, that's way cooler.
It was called Project Orion. You search for it. He was on that project. But there was a lot of guys on it. Thousands of them. Project Orion.
Allison told a joke. What did the phrenologist say to the bartender? Give me a beer and put a head on it.
Let me go ahead and freshen your drink up.
Okay. So what is phrenology? Probably most of you know. But the kind of principles behind phrenology. As I said, it is obviously a pseudoscience. It has been debunked since then. And even when it was first introduced in the late 18th century, early 19th century, even a lot of scientists back then were like, bro, no. So even back then, some scientists knew that it was bullshit. Now, I will say, though, that some of the shit they came up with turned out to be correct. The one thing that this posits that is correct, and this was controversial at the time, which we'll get into. Obviously, the brain is the organ of the mind, duh. But that wasn't. I kind of feel like that was kind of the prevailing thing, like in ancient times, that it wasn't the brain, that it was the heart usually. But Hippocrates figured out the brain, so that's been a while. But they did figure that out, and he was kind of one of the first scientists, thank you, to say that the brain had localized areas that had different functions. Now, prior to this, the guy that came up with phrenology first was probably not the first person to kind of come out and say this, but he was kind of more the one that kind of popularized the idea. But prior to this, the brain was just seen as kind of like a homogeneous kind of organ that came up with stuff. They didn't really have a concept of different areas of the brain being for different things, like having different functions. So we can thank phrenology for coming up with that concept or popularizing that concept, which, like I said, turned out to be correct. All the rest of it is wrong. But that was actually correct. So good for them, I guess. History of science, it's fascinating. Like, so much wrong shit, but sometimes the wrong shit got like one thing right, and growing pains. It was all that kind of stuff. So that was correct. Now, the rest of the stuff is not correct. Because one of the other things that it posited was that whatever part of your brain, like they all had their own muscles, so that whatever your personality was like or your morality was like, if you used that part of your brain more, then it was bigger than a part of your brain that you didn't use as much. hence the bumps in your skull. That was kind of where that came from. So every time like I think about that idea, I just think of like a little cartoon brain with little arms and legs, like lifted little weights and stuff like that. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but yeah. So so they thought that your brain was like a muscle that you could make larger by working it out, which is not exactly how it works. And it would make it bigger, and that would be like on your skull somehow. So there's that. And obviously the biggest idea in phrenology is that each part of your brain, by, kind of feeling the bumps on your skull, where the bumps on your skull are, that corresponds to the part of your brain that's underneath that part of your skull. And since it has a bump, it's bigger, and that means that that part of your brain is more prominent, and that's more prominent in your personality, right? Which obviously is not right. But that was kind of the big thing. And if you guys know, because you've probably seen like the phrenology busts, which are very famous, they didn't actually come out until later on, after it had kind of become more of like a pop psychology thing. And that was kind of, we'll get into that too, because I thought that was kind of interesting. But I don't think a lot of the earlier ones had like charts and stuff. But I think like the busts and stuff that was a later kind of snake oil kind of invention.
Ben replied about Project Orion. I doubt the EPA would have approved. Actually, they weren't worried about that. They sold a bunch of them. The Air Force bought like 7 or 8 of them. The Army wanted 3, but President, what's his name? Guy who got assassinated, Kennedy. He saw that shit and he's like, no, we can't. The Soviets are gonna trip the fuck out, because you're talking about the Death Star. These things could fucking shoot down atomic fucking missiles and shit from space. So that's why they killed it. But if I remember correctly, launching one into orbit left enough waste in the air that was equivalent to a single atomic bomb above ground test. And they were doing those all the time back then. So once it was in orbit, it was, clean. And they were willing to fucking get it up there just with, that amount of radiation. They didn't care about above ground tests. They did that fucking like once every few weeks back in those days. But yeah, it'd have been awesome, man. That was some manly shit. Atomic fucking plasma would have ripped the sky apart. They were going to launch them from out in the middle of the ocean anyway.
Danny says Ariel gives great phrenology.
Yeah.
Sure, we haven't tried that. We haven't tried that aspect out yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. You'd tear her up.
Yeah, probably.
I would. My size and shit. Yeah.
Not that he's bragging or anything.
I'm not bragging. I got pictures. Pictures proving. It's expensive. It would just tear it up.
Yeah, probably. You want to be kind of gentle with it.
all the experts say don't use the oral feature on any of those.
Yeah. The other stuff seems a little more robust, but
yeah.
The mouth's not so much.
Yeah.
Just, in case you wanted to know any of that. So as I mentioned earlier, in the ancient world, it was pretty much like the very ancient Greeks, your Egyptians, in the biblical time frame and everything like that. Their idea was that the, I guess, seat of human emotions or personality or something was the heart, right? That's what they thought back then. However, Hippocrates was among the first, they don't know if he was actually the first, but his shit survived, so you know what I mean, who actually said no, it was the brain. So he was correct about that. Also, you had Galen, a very famous Greek physician who had some crazy-ass ideas, and this was kind of one of them. Now, he was also correct that the brain was the seat of the personality and the seat of emotions and everything like that, but he also thought that the brain was made out of sperm.
Ridiculous.
So,
yeah,
nice try. But, you were right about one thing, but not about the other thing.
Thing about Galen, he was like late Roman period, I believe is where he came from. They read that motherfucker for centuries, almost 1,000 years, man. Maybe more than 1,000 years.
He's old. He must be correct.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It's ancient wisdom.
And really, the only reason why they read him is because he wrote several pages a day. So there were many of his books out there.
He wrote a lot, yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Very prolific.
Because he wrote it, they read it, and then they believed it. But he was talking out of his ass through a lot of that shit.
Oh, yeah, he was making shit up. Totally. Well, you know, until the Enlightenment era, there really wasn't a scientific method, per se.
No.
It was basically either you were just pulling shit out your ass, like, I see this, so this is the way shit must be, like, just from your own personal experience, which is bullshit. Or you're like, well, I observed a couple of things, and I wrote it down, and that's the way shit is forever.
There seems to have been the beginnings of a scientific stuff happening.
But it was still pretty rudimentary.
In ancient Rome.
Yeah.
There was guys who... And they really started off in their medical industry, which had a lot to do with the Roman Colosseum, because they were repairing wounds on expensive dudes, gladiators. And so they did kind of know that there was an order to science, that you needed things like proof, and then that you had to check, you know what I mean, and to double check. And I think they knew about statistics. They had one guy that they mentioned who was doing vivisections on pigs, who was making a lot of progress rapidly. You know, he could cut a pig apart and fucking, you could see the beating heart in there and see how lungs were working. And he was messing around with live pigs' brains, that they could do certain things. And when the Roman authorities found out about this, they told him to cease and desist, that it was inhumane treatment, that this was something against the gods. So, in a weird way, moralism stopped fucking science, which I can understand that, man. Cutting an animal apart is pretty fucking brutal.
Yeah,
when it's
fucked
alive.
up. Yeah, I mean...
But if you don't know these things and you're trying to fucking save human lives, that may be something they should consider. Yeah, maybe we should find out. But evidently the guy that was doing it, and I forgot his name, they said he figured out a lot of basics that turned out to be true.
Yeah.
Had they let that dude work, he would have figured it out probably. Especially if there was a team there, so they could call bullshit on one another.
Yeah, because you need that.
You don't need one dude.
That's why we have the peer review system nowadays.
Right, yeah.
It works out pretty good.
Yeah.
You need somebody else to call bullshit on your shit if they can't replicate
and
it.
that could have propelled science ahead a lot. Although some historians say we don't really know what the Romans knew. That so much of it's lost. We are only getting frozen pictures in time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of time there where they might have had just been at almost 1800s levels for a while.
Yeah, and we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Right.
That's
I kind of think, based on certain things that they found, like fucking Caligula's pleasure barges that were sunk down in that fucking little lake. There's metallurgy that happened in there, and the valves and pumps that were in that thing, bilge pumps and shit, water pumps that looked like something out of the early 1900s in terms of metallurgy and casting. So their technology was ahead, better than what we think it was. They were able to do shit.
Well, it's just sad that so much of history has been lost. You know,
Yeah.
So much writing has been lost. So we will never know, probably.
Yeah.
Like how much, if there was some dude that was just like working in sort of isolation and wrote all this amazing shit, but then like his house burned down or some shit, we would never know.
1,000 years from now, everything that we built here in the United States and Western, it'll all be gone. There won't be any record of it or traces, probably.
That's just how shit happens, though.
Yeah, not even the buildings; they'd be long gone.
All right, so where was I? Okay, so brain formed of sperm, yeah. He also thought that that the body had 3 souls in it, and that the brain was the seat of one of the souls. I don't know where the other 2 were. So,
like I said, there was no peer review.
Yeah, well, like I said, it was mostly just, and I'm gonna say, and Tammy will appreciate this, but yeah, I'm gonna say like, that there was an Eddie Izzard routine where he was saying, where he was saying about the invention of the scientific method, and he's like, yeah, before that, everybody would just come up with something, and everybody would be like, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. Somebody, like a smart person, would write a book, because he wrote a book, and he could just be pulling stuff right out of his rectal cavity, and like everyone would be like, that sounds good.
And they seemed to. The only books you could trust from the old Roman era were books about politics. That they were written today.
But the thing about it is that they didn't, like I said, scientific method didn't really get rolling until like later on.
Yeah.
And you can't. I also don't know if they understood like fallacies. They didn't really understand in a scientific context. They didn't understand like the confirmation bias. They didn't understand, which is why we have peer review, which is why we have this and that, because you have to have checks and balances on stuff because you don't know. And honestly, like people that have, everybody has biases and they might be unconscious, and that might be leaking into your work without you realizing it. And that's why you need other people to like check what you're doing. You know what I mean? To make sure you're not doing that. So I'm not really sure if they got on board with that until like later on. So what I'm saying is that even though Hippocrates did come up with the idea of the brain being the seat of the personality, which again is correct, you know, that was kind of like a new thing, but it didn't really gain popularity, I feel like, until again like the Enlightenment era, kind of around that era. Because the thing about it was that 1700s roll around and you have scientists, academics, people like that, and everyone's getting into the natural sciences, right? So they want to like observe everything and they're trying to figure everything out. So at this stage, you have to think too that religion was still a huge influence. And religion had always said that, you know, the seat of the personality, if you want to call it that, is the soul, which is, you know, that's a religious concept. And so when all of these kind of scientists started coming out and saying, well, maybe there's a scientific approach to this, maybe we can find out like where people's personalities come from, where their morality comes from, church was getting a little uncomfortable with it. But still, you know, they were going forward anyway. But that had previously been a religion area, not a science area. Now, in 1775, there was this Swiss guy. He was a theologian. And his name was Johann Lavater or Lavate. I'm not really sure how you pronounce his last name. And he was the guy that came up with physiognomy, which, like I said, I mentioned before, which is kind of similar to phrenology, and is, for some unfathomable reason, having a big heyday on TikTok right now, which is kind of depressing. But yeah, so he came up with that idea. He basically said that you could deduce people's character traits and their morality from their facial features. Now, you know, so he had all these things where, like, for example, you have a long forehead, that means you're intelligent. You have a short forehead, that means you're volatile. You have a snub nose, that means you're Irish, vain and a liar. You have a sharp nose, you're very, your perceptiveness is very quick. If you have a pug nose, you have an absence of reasoning power. That's nice. And are irritable and quarrelsome. So there's that. Now, keep in mind, he's not talking about, because I kind of feel like the TikTok people and stuff that are doing face reading and all that kind of stuff, there's a difference between saying, you know, these are attractive features or symmetrical features. What he's saying is that you can look at a person's face and the shape of their nose will tell you that they are a cheater or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Which is ridiculous. But yeah, that's what he's basically saying.
What's funny is that, like, they're so close to something that is almost true, but why the facial features? And what I'm getting at is that a mentalist can look at a person and size them up very accurately by how they're built, their state of health, what they're wearing. That indicates a lot more than just somebody's facial features.
It's not even so much like what their I think it's more how they carry themselves, their haircut, their clothes, like that kind of stuff. Because that's how you choose to present yourself. Right, yeah. And you can it's not just how your nose is, because it's like you were kind of born with that unless you had surgery.
Why are they going that route? I mean, a good mentalist can size up a mark or a fucking leader, whatever, very rapidly. He's going to look at you and go, and knows your socioeconomic status. Yeah. Fucking can figure out fucking what part of the town you live in based on what you look like. And then talking to you, they can even find out even more, your level of education, you know, and that's a lot more accurate. And, you know, a mentalist is just more of like a fucking public performer version of a fucking con man. A con man does it to fucking find a mark and fucking fuck them over, you know.
But the mentalist is at least honest about it.
Yeah, so
they're saying that they're doing a trick.
Yeah, but I just think it's funny that it's kind of a correct concept. But the facial features are not where you want to look.
That's
to
what I
find
mean.
that.
We're not saying that you can't tell
Who
stuff
somebody
about
is
people
by how they look.
by looking at them.
Yeah, you can.
But I think that if you're telling about what people can look at, you can tell maybe their financial status or, how they choose to present themselves. Like I said, you can tell if a person's an artist, or you can tell just by the way they dress or by the way they wear their hair or something like that. Not the shape of their nose.
Yeah, I can tell a motherfucker's emotional status by the way he's walking. I can sense a threat, or a person who's just been fucked over, or a person. Everybody can. It's just many of you fucking aren't very conscious about it. You know what I mean? Like, you get a feelings for people like, oh man, that dude looks sad, because he is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like I said, we're not saying that. He's just saying that there are innate facial features
that dictate who you
that
are.
dictate what your personality is.
Yeah, it's
like, if you have this shape of nose, then you are this type of person, which
Yeah.
is obviously ridiculous. We're not saying that you can't tell stuff about people by looking at them, because obviously you can.
You definitely can.
Because obviously you can.
Yeah. Being very superficial actually is a very deep act. You can. The thing is you just don't want to. You want to be fair and true about what you're seeing in a person. Like, say for instance, a person's very overweight. You're overweight. There's a lot of things that go along with that, and that accurately follows. That doesn't mean that's not a good person.
Right.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that's not a person that you can't hang out with.
Well, and see, that's the problem that I have with a lot of these kind of biological determinism kind of pseudosciences, is that they're not just saying, oh, well, there's different organs in the brain that correspond to different things, which, like I said, is kind of wrong. But they're extrapolating a moral judgment from that.
Yeah, it's always like a moral judgment that they're getting at. Like, stay away from this person.
Yeah, and that's
like this.
Obviously that's when you have a problem, and that's why phrenology was used later on to justify slavery and all kinds of other things, because, like, well, this person's skull, that it shows that they obviously need to be subjugated and we're superior and blah blah, because they're making, even though a skull is a fucking skull, it doesn't have a moral thing to it. It's just an object. Yeah. But they're making a moral ranking about it,
and
which is
really
the issue.
they're talking about Caucasoids, Caucasians. Man, when I was living in Korea, Korean people, their skulls look like Korean skulls. They just do. So where's this science? How is that going to apply to this? You know what I mean? They say, well, this person, her forehead's a little too flat on the front, so this person is dumb, or no.
That's exactly. Well, see, that's what I mean. That's what they would say.
That's what they would say, but they would go, no. Living in Korea, you find Koreans actually are very good-looking people. They don't look like us. They have different skull features and different body features. They're different from the Japanese. They're different from the Chinese. They just have a Korean look. And then there's a lot of different versions of that look. They don't all look the same. So how is this science going to fucking deal with that? It's not science if not a science if you can't apply it to a Korean per se. And I'm pulling out on the Koreans because they got personal experience, and they're the most homogeneous society in the world. Very little interbreeding with other ethnic groups. They're what do you call it? Homogeneous? Is that what it is? Yeah, homogeneous. Yeah. So if it was a science, it could also apply to the Koreans. And I guarantee you it's never going to apply to the Koreans.
That's kind of the problem with a lot of these types of pseudosciences, is that obviously if a white European comes up with this idea, he's going to somehow cram the idea that white Europeans are superior to all the other races, because obviously we have the bump in our skull here, which means that we're smarter and blah blah. If it had been developed somewhere else, then obviously they would make it so they were superior, which that's not scientific at all, because you're just confirming your biases is what you're doing. And I think that was what a lot of the problem here is that they see differences in skulls. And they didn't say, oh, people's skulls are different, period, which, duh, they are. They had to, make a whole ranking system out of it, which doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow. So, yeah, that's the problem I have with a lot of the stuff, and why this kind of stuff is, like I said, still kind of pernicious, even though it sounds very silly on its face, you know? So the thing about this dude that came up with physiognomy, which, again, is trending on TikTok, so yay. Except it's called face reading, but it's the same thing. So this dude, as was the tradition around this time, he's not really doing like science like you would do today. He's basically being like, oh, well, I looked around at some people and I observed this, so obviously it's true everywhere at all times. So, you know, it was that kind of shit. But the idea that he came up with, which again was a little bit racist, a lot racist actually. If you see some of the texts of this from the era, they're something else. So that kind of implanted the idea in the burgeoning scientific community, I guess, that, oh, well, here's the thing where you can biologically, it's science, bitches, like you can look at a person and tell what their personality is, if they're a criminal or if they're a shithead or whatever. Now, at around this same time, as I mentioned earlier, there was still kind of a big thing going on, whether... I kind of feel like the prevailing knowledge at that time was that the brain was just one, like, big organ. You know what I mean? It just did shit. They didn't really think about it in terms of it having different areas that specialize or were localized in different things, right? But you did have some neurologists, if you even had that back then, who were adherents of what they called the cerebral localization theory, where... you know, which again turned out to be correct, where certain parts of the brain do certain things. The brain is a lot more complicated than that, obviously, because of all the, you know, neurons and the networks and stuff. But generally, general portions of the brain are generally for this kind of thing. You know what I mean?
I'm being called out a little bit.
What?
Fucking, who is this? Is that Ben? Yeah, Ben. Read what Ben said today. He says, I'm hilarious because the Roman books on politics were censored heavily. Yeah, I know. The thing is, though, is that those weren't books on politics. I misspoke. Those are history books. You got fucking Suetonius and Tacitus and shit. What I meant is that fucking when you had... those were pretty censored because when those books were written, and you couldn't say anything bad about the emperor's fucking relatives in those books. But whenever there was... I'm trying to think of any books that were about just nothing but politics other than maybe like fucking Cicero and shit. But when they talked about politics in general, they usually would get on the fucking subject of fucking how much corruption there was. That's what I meant by the fact that they were kind of more honest. You could read what they were talking about, and then some of the things that they would say of a political nature, it just sounds like that. It sounds like somebody talking about today. Or actually, it could have been even back in the 1980s. It sounded fucking like something that would happen. You know, about raising money against from supporters to fucking support certain bills and to pass certain laws and buying fucking elections, which they just openly did that. If you wanted a seat in the Senate, you had to buy it. And you did that by having supporters who helped you raise the money. Which is how they do it now. They just call it an election. Whoever has the most money wins the election. Because you can throw these elections. These elections here, they've never really been honest, as far as I can tell. Unless it's massive fucking... a person could win a majority vote, but it would have to be massive. So big that you couldn't throw the vote by stuffing ballot boxes in key places. Here comes Jen.
Baby's yelling at me.
She's yelling at you? Why? The cat's yelling at Jen.
Because I went to the bathroom and I didn't let her in. She's like, you left me outside
Oscar's
the door.
in Cancun. What's up, Oscar?
Wow. You having fun?
Yeah, you gotta be having fun. Who'd you take with you? How much of a... I'm here by myself. He's gonna be chasing them girls.
Chasing the girls.
Stay away from them pros. Not unless you got money in your pocket.
I mean, you know.
Man does what he... Man's gotta do what he gotta do.
Don't tell him what to do.
I'm not gonna tell him what to do.
You tell everybody what to do. You'd be down there doing that. Getting some pros.
If I was single... Yeah.
Yeah.
If I was single...
That's good. You made that distinction.
Well, yeah. See, listen. See, if I was single, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so...
If I was in Cancun, you'd be with me.
Well, yeah. I would hope so. You're not going on vacation without me, goddamn.
Yeah.
I need a vacation.
We get a girl together. If we
I haven't had one in a long time.
We'd buy a piece of ass.
If we had to.
So what do you think of that one, honey? Yeah. Get your strap on, Jen.
Yeah, that might be fun. So there are two things going on. You had the people that still thought the brain was just one thing, and some that thought that it was modular, I guess, or had like different functions for different areas. Obviously we know which one of those was correct, but, there was still kind of a debate at this point. So how they were trying to figure this out was, dissection and looking at skulls. Because at this point, you had all of these kind of gentleman scientists who were largely, like I said, upper class, and they had the money and the leisure time, and they collected skulls. You know what I mean? Like, to look at them. This cabinet of curiosities, that was a very big thing at this time period. And, again, a little bit racist, because a lot of times they would go to other countries or have other people go to other countries and get skulls of non-white people that they thought were interesting looking, and they would bring those back for their collections. And sometimes they did not get permission from the families of the people whose bodies they stole, so that's nice. But yeah, so they had these big, huge collections of skulls, and that's what they largely used for research in this area. So this is all going on. Now, this is around the time when the dude who came up with phrenology was born. His name was Franz Joseph Gall. He was born in 1758. Now, what got him interested in phrenology? Like I said, this was all kind of in the zeitgeist at the time, because physiognomy was a thing. So it was kind of, I don't know if it was like established science, but it was out there, the idea that you could tell someone's personality traits by the features on their face. So it was an idea that was out there. So he grows up, and he's in school, and he apparently thought quite a bit of himself, I guess, like as a very intelligent person. So he's in school, and he notices, again, it's a very small sample size. This is a very common, I see this a lot, and I still see it in this era of science, I guess, is that they know a couple people. Like, I know 4 people that are, I don't know, Smurfs. And every single one of them that I know is a raging, gaping asshole. Therefore, all Smurfs are raging, gaping assholes. I kind of feel like there's some of this going on, too. They have a very small sample size. They have a very small limited area of expertise, and they extrapolate that to, like, the world at large. I kind of feel like there's a lot of that going on here. So he's in his class, and he notices that a few of the students in his class that he deems smarter than him, and he apparently thought he was one of the smartest, so this can't have been that many people, had real big eyes that kind of bulged out a little bit. So he thought that, and he's like, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing that he observed. Later on, he goes to medical school and notices the same thing about some of the people he was in medical school with. The really, really smart ones have these really big eyes that kind of bulge out. So from that, he comes up with the idea that their eyes must be big and bulging because their brain is bigger.
Well, the eyes and the brain are connected.
They are, yeah. It's not a completely dumb I mean, it's dumb now because we know that that's stupid, like that's bullshit. But so it probably didn't seem as stupid back then.
I got a feeling he's imagining things. He's looking at the smart people and goes, his eyes are bigger than the other guys. And I bet you went up there and measured them with a micrometer. They were the same size.
That's what I'm seeing. This is the problem.
That's the problem.
When you're just having one person observing. And like I said, it couldn't have been that large of a sample size. It could have just been like maybe a handful of people at most.
And it could be that the smartest guys that you're seeing also have their eyes wide open because they're learning and paying attention. The other guys
like they're alert. And the other guys are like bored.
The other guys are fucking bored with the shit.
Right.
So it's probably that. So, he's bullshit. But he probably made a lot of money selling these books, though.
Well, not so much him, but like later dudes did. We'll get into that. Like I said, this is kind of an interesting history. Yeah, Danny said, I heard fetal alcohol syndrome causes bulging eyes. Yeah, then maybe that's what it was. But yeah, it's just, like I said, we don't even know if this was just his subjective opinion. Like, did he measure their eyes? I doubt it. Maybe just like from his perception, they were bigger. But that was something that kind of got him. He's like, oh, well, their brains must be bigger. And that was kind of his idea, I guess, that sort of kicked off phrenology. So he finished medical school, and he became a doctor later on. It was in 1785. And he had his own little practice in Vienna. And he also worked at an insane asylum. And he was like really jazzed about working at this place because he thought to himself, well, since all of the smart people I know have big ass eyes, all of these people in here are crazy. And if I can find one thing that they all have, then I'll be able to like identify crazy people just by looking at them. That's kind of how his thought process was, I guess. So he starts looking at all the people in this asylum who probably were not all insane, because people got thrown in those asylums for all kinds of stupid reasons back then. You know, this is the late 18th century. So he notices, evidently, that all of the people, probably not all of the people, but all of the people that he saw or that he was able to examine that were supposedly crazy had bumps on the sides of their skulls, like on the sides of their heads. So he said, aha, that must be it. That must be a manifestation of their insanity, is these bumps on the sides of their heads.
How does he define a bump on the side of the head?
See, that's
kind of vague.
Exactly.
Bump on the side of your head.
Exactly. This was how they did science back then. It was just kind of, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like that.
For all we know, this is how they're doing science now, though.
If they are, they know better. They don't do it like that.
I think when money's involved, they probably just do whatever.
Well, yeah, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, it's drug companies and shit. Remember, like when we were talking about all the evidence on Epstein Islands points to the fact that they were trying to control science, and I don't know, they probably did to a certain amount, be able to control dudes in key positions to get fucking drugs passed to make money. I don't think it was anything more nefarious than that. It's just making money. That's what I think it was.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and if you can control the science, then you can fucking make money.
But back then, nobody really knew any better. Mm-hmm. They were basically just like, well, I see stuff, so that must be how it is. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So he's basically saying, so obviously something to do with these bumps on the sides of their heads has something to do with their insanity, right? Which obviously that's not the case, but whatever. So he publishes a book in 1791. And the title of it, because I love how books in this era had like fucking huge ass titles. And this isn't the longest one we'll be hearing tonight. His first book was called Philosophical Medical Investigations into Nature and Art in the Sick and Healthy State of Man. So, got it all covered there? Good. Now, in this particular work, he did kind of come forward and say, which was at the time kind of a controversial statement, that the seat of the personality, the seat of morality, was in the brain. So he's basically advocating for a more scientific or evidential approach to morality, to personality, which, like I said, was kind of a big deal at the time. And he also came forward and said that he thought that the cerebral localization theory was correct, that the brain had different localities that did different things, different functions, which, again, is correct. But that was, again, a little bit controversial. So I love this, that he puts the book out, and then he's like, oh, well, I guess I need to retroactively come up with evidence to support this whole fucking book that I just put out of shit that I just pulled out of my ass. Instead of doing that first, and then, like, publishing your findings. But I guess he thought he'd publish it first and then kind of come up with the evidence later. I'll worry about that later. So he starts, like a lot of kind of upper class dudes did at the time, he starts collecting skulls. And he had a bunch of them, like 300 something at some point. And as he was doing it, he comes up with this whole fucking system. It wasn't good enough just to say, the brain has different areas that do different things, which, like I said, is correct. If that's all he'd said, nobody would have said boo about it. It wouldn't have been this whole thing. But no, he had to come up with a whole fucking system about where in the brain all of these personality things were. So he starts writing kind of his big main work, which actually didn't... He started working on it in 1809, but it didn't get published until like 10 years later. And again, I told you it wasn't the longest book title that you were going to hear tonight. Listen to this shit. This is what the book was called. The Anatomy and Physiology of the Nervous System in general, and of the brain in particular, with observations upon the possibility of ascertaining several intellectual and moral dispositions of man and animal by the configurations of their heads.
So he's being thorough.
That's what the book was called. You can have absolutely no doubt as to what he's talking about in this book. Yeah. There's no mystery. He's just going to lay...
If somebody wants to refer you to this book, they have to fucking tell you that whole fucking title. That's the thing. Because I couldn't remember the name of that book. So it says, what book do you read? Oh,
the one that's like... The title's almost as long as the book is. Yeah, right. That one. Yeah. So
he was a good marketer.
But all the scientific books were called that because
I wasn't there.
At this time period, scientists or people that were aspiring to be scientists, I guess, they were writing for an academic audience, so they weren't really worried about. And some of them were kind of snotty about not writing for the hoi polloi, you know what I mean? Yeah. So they didn't want something that was. I mean, I don't know until a little bit later. I don't think there was any concept of like a pop science, like a book on science written for the popular public. Why
didn't they introduce the concept of acronyms?
Yeah, I don't know.
Where you make an acronym, you know, that's what I would.
Because they wanted to sound smart.
Yeah, want to sound smart.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I mean, why?
Yeah, I'd have made an acronym for that.
Yeah.
The boudage concept. What the fuck is a boudage?
And then just read the book and find out.
Yeah. The boudage concept.
You gotta read the book and find out what that is.
Yeah.
But yeah. So in this book, which was kind of his main one, so he lays out the main principles of what would later be called phrenology. He did not call it that, which I'll get into in a little bit. But again, first principle, the brain is, where the mind comes from, where the personality and what they had previously called the soul, that's where that comes from, which obviously that's correct. The brain is not a homogeneous unity, but an aggregate of mental organs with specific functions. Again, correct, no problem there. The cerebral organs are topographically localized. That's pretty much correct. Other things being equal, the relative size of any particular mental organ is indicative of the power or strength of that organ. Now you're starting to kind of go right out. That's not really correct, but okay. Since the skull ossifies over the brain during infant development, external craniological means could be used to diagnose the internal states of the mental characters. Not so much.
So what they're saying, if you can measure the internal dimensions of these fucking hemispheres and shit inside the brain, you'd know how a person worked.
Yeah.
Is that what they're saying? That's
not
how it works.
No.
Yeah.
I know.
At all.
But they thought it did. And again, the whole thing about the parts of your brain that you used more or that had more strength or whatever were bigger, which is obviously not. It's not so much bigger. Parts of your brain that you use more do have more connections, like more neurological connections. That's true, but it doesn't make them like physically larger.
They don't really know how the brain works.
Not really. I mean, we know better than then, but we still don't know exactly.
We still don't know that much because they found people that had totally normal lives and normal intelligence levels. And you can't really see anything wrong with them. And then they've done fucking scans of their brain, or fucking done an MRI of their brain. And there's not much brain there. Something happened to where they were like, something happened when they were growing up as children, and there was a bunch of fluid in there. And you look at it, it's like 1/3 the size it should be, but the person seems to be normal. That's weird.
Well, what's one of the interesting things about brains is their plasticity.
Yeah.
And it's not just in infancy either, because there's, numerous cases of people who had like terrible brain injuries and things like that, where the brain essentially rewired itself to compensate for injuries. Like sometimes it's not perfect, but the brain tries to do what it can to compensate for injuries and things like that, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I don't think
injury. I got over it in a couple of years.
Yeah.
First year I was fucking volatile as fuck, but it goes away. Yeah. So it does. That's part of my VA fucking settlement shit. But
yeah, because he was all messed up.
Yeah. So Yeah, the brain is fucking a lot more powerful than people think it is, and it's a lot more like elastic. It can rebound quite well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some things it can't come back from. It's
Yeah.
like there's some damage that it can't come back from, but it is largely very plastic. If you have damage in a certain area, sometimes other areas can compensate.
There were guys that got shot through the fucking head. And they were fucking basket cases for a few years, and then they come back and fucking 10 years later they're pretty normal.
Yeah,
It all just fucking depends.
I don't really want to
Yeah.
use this word, but it's kind of like miraculous in a
Yeah.
way. It's not really miraculous.
Well-
That's just how the brain works, and it's not so much the size of the brain, because the size of the brain has shown to not really have that much of a correlation with intelligence or whatever you want to call it. It's actually the number and complexity of connections, neuronal connections within the brain more than the size
And I
of the
think it's
brain.
more than that. I believe in Stuart Hameroff's fucking quantum soul theory. It's not digital. There's something happening that's quantum. So there's certain structures in the brain happening in the quantum universe too. It's an entangled quantum particles. Might be like a soul. They call it the quantum soul theory. Because there's creatures out there that really shouldn't be able to do what they do. There's ants that are so small, look like little wisps of fucking sand running around. And you look at them under electron microscope, and there's not much brain material there. But they can do fucking tasks that exceed the amount of fucking neurons in their brain. Because it's not happening there. That's only part of it. It's happening in a field outside that brain of a bunch of super they're like quantum particles in superposition, and they're in quantum entangled. So your brain's not just in your head, it's also like around it, like a soul or an aura. It's happening there too. And it's all analog, it's not digital. That's what I believe, based on all my experiences. And some of my experiences have been paranormal. So, like near-death experience, out-of-body experience, poltergeist stuff, RSPK. So, the physical aspects of the brain are not all of it. There's more. There's shit you can't see. It's microscopic, happening in a slightly higher dimension, maybe. That's what they're talking about.
Camp Guy said, folks who are blind from birth never develop the brain structure to see properly. If given sight, they don't see things the same way that we do. Yeah, that's the thing. It's just kind of like the brain will try to compensate. And sometimes it can't compensate completely in the same way that, like you said, someone with sight from birth would have.
Yeah.
But it will try to rig something together.
Yeah, I've heard that cats who were blind from a very young age can run around in the house, and you'd never know that cat was blind. They can even fucking bat moths out of the fucking air and chase stuff. And there's no eyes on that cat. Friends of the families had cats like that. And they could just run around, you'd never know that the cat was blind.
I had a cat that was deaf, and I didn't know she was deaf for a very long time.
So they developed kind of like Daredevil.
Well, that's the thing, and you see this in humans also,
Yeah.
that, obviously if you have, are born with a certain kind of, like, disability or something like that, like, a lot of times you'll try to... There was that one guy, I remember seeing a show about him where he was blind, and he could do echolocation, like a bat. And honestly, that's something probably anybody could learn, He just kind of learned it, or I guess it sort of came more naturally to him because... of necessity, but I think probably anybody could learn to do that if you wanted to. But it was really interesting. But like I said, I'm really fascinated with like brain science and how people's brains like will compensate for certain things. And I think we did a show too about, didn't we do a show a while back about what do they call that? Where like somebody gets struck by lightning and then they can like play the piano suddenly or like do complicated math and stuff. That's always like fascinated me too. It's like, what is it called? Like sudden savant syndrome or something like that. That's like really, really interesting. The brains are weird and they're like super fascinating. But so, like I said, we have phrenology to thank for kind of popularizing the idea that different areas of the brain do different things. It's just that they took it too far in the wrong direction. Like they were on the right track, but then they just kind of went wildly off the rails. You know what I mean? It was that, which was kind of a shame. But they did kind of come up with that idea, so we have to thank them for that anyway. So basically the stuff that he's coming up with is saying that therefore, because certain parts of your brain that you use more than others, or that are more powerful than others, will be bigger, and because the way that your skull forms over your brain, means that you will have bumps on your skull where those parts of the brain are that you use more. So he came up with, now here's the thing. Honestly, how he came up with, what he called them the organs in the brain. Initially, there were 27, which I'm going to tell you what they are in a bit. How he came up with these, I'm not entirely sure. I suspect he just pulled them out of his butt. That's not probably how he would see it. He would probably say, I observed the 300 skulls that I have in my collection, and from those observations, I determined that, you know, this organ does this and this organ does that. But like I said, to me, it seems like he just pulled them out of his ass. But you know what I mean? I'm not being mean. He's dead. He can't come at me. So, so the thing about it, okay, so Gall, even though he's considered, I guess, like the father of phrenology, he actually did not call it phrenology. His name for it, he called it organology, craniology, brain physiology, which sounds pretty, you know, normal, or doctrine of the skull. I'm like, ooh, that sounds like a horror movie I'd like to watch. But yeah, so the name phrenology, which is actually Greek for, I believe, mind knowledge or something, was actually coined later, like by a different guy, like by a British guy, like in 1815. So Gall comes up with this whole system of what parts of your brain corresponded to what parts of your personality or your morality or whatever. How he came up with it, I don't really know. It's just nebulous. You know what I mean? And how he started kind of popularizing this, even though it seemed more, he was more interested, I think, in coming up with the scientific thing. I don't think he was like a popularizing kind of guy. That came later, like when all the hucksters got involved. I think he was just genuinely trying to come up with an actual scientific idea, you know? He didn't really seem like the type of guy that was like, oh, I'm going to make some fucking money off this. But he did kind of, he went on the lecture circuit in Vienna. And at one of these lectures, there was a medical student, and his name was Johann Spurzheim. Now, he got super into this. He just was into this fucking idea of phrenology, which wasn't called that yet. But he's like, yes, this is obviously correct. We need to get together and do some shit. So Spurzheim became his acolyte, I guess, and they started doing like lecture shit together. But the thing about it, as I mentioned earlier, because the church was still very powerful at this time, and they found phrenology sacrilegious because the seat of the personality, the seat of morality, they thought was in the soul, which was a spiritual concept, and they didn't like that some snot-nosed scientist was coming out trying to say, no, it all comes from your brain. Like, that's atheism. That's materialism. They weren't into it. So they got in all kinds of trouble. And basically, the emperor of Austria at that time, in 1801, said that Gall was not allowed to give lectures in Austria anymore. So he had to leave.
He got banned.
He got banned. Yeah. So they were a little offended. So basically, they had to leave Austria, which, you know, whatever, fair enough. Now, the thing about it, as I said, it seemed to me that Gall was more interested in the science. Well, I use science in air quotes because it wasn't really science, but you know what I mean. It was quasi-science, pseudoscience. But Spurzheim seemed more willing to kind of go out there and kind of spread the ideas around, right? And it seemed like there were a lot of people who were into the idea. Like, you know, even though a lot of scientists at the time were kind of like, nah, bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, immediately. A lot of scientists were like, no, that sounds correct. You know what I mean? So they did have a lot of advocates. So the two of them start doing this big lecture tour all around Europe. And they would do a thing, like Gall would do, like, he would give the lectures and everything like that. And then Spurzheim would do dissection. He would, like, dissect brains and stuff like that and be like, and here is the seat of blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And from that tour around Europe, like, phrenology started getting really, really popular. Now, phrenology was a big thing from about well, until about 1830, 1840, when it kind of all collapsed at once. And then, like I said, there was a little bit of a revival like in the early 20th century. But so there was like a 30, 40-year period in there where it was like super, super popular among a certain segment of the scientific, community. A large contingent of the scientific community also thought it was bullshit and were like arguing against it. So that wasn't like it was, it wasn't like it was the overriding thing. You know what I mean? It was a controversial idea pretty much the entire time, but it was very, very popular. It started kind of going more pop psychology later on, like I said, but it got real big. Now, so as I mentioned, Gall thought that there were 27 organs in the brain, like sections of your brain, essentially. Now, 19 of these organs, he thought that we shared with other animals, which was pretty, because this was before Darwin. Origin of Species didn't come out till 1859, I don't think. So this was before Darwin. So the fact that he's doing that, so I can imagine that would have pissed the church off even more. Like that we have the same brains as animals. But yeah. So what they would do, you would go get a phrenological examination. They would basically just feel your head. In the early days, they just did it with their hands. Later on, like after it became more of like a pop phenomenon, they would use tools like calipers and tape measures and shit like that. But early on, they would basically just feel your head, be like, well, you have a big bump right here, and this is your seat of whatever it is, and that means blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And the thing about it, too, was that they used a lot of, there's a lot of phrenological textbooks, and they focused a lot on, like, drawings of people's heads. You know what I mean? So, like, drawings of people's skulls and stuff, because that's kind of what they had. They didn't have, like, a lot of evidence, you know what I'm saying? So, what?
I was saying, this would be so funny, man, if they focused on the dick instead of the head. Like, trying to figure out what a dude was like by the size and shape of his dick.
You know that there was
Why
some
weren't they going
scientists
that
out
route?
there.
Yeah, that would have been like, they'd be paying dudes to come in there to fucking rock
Schlongology.
Up. So they could, schlongology. It's called schlongology. Jen fucking coined a new word, schlongology. They're trying to. Is this one's curved to the right? It curves to the right a little bit. So what does that mean? You know what I mean?
What does that say about you as a person?
Yeah, what does that say about you about a person? This was more mushroom shaped. Just fucking crazy shit. They should have come up with why. Okay. I know. I mean, they were saying, well, this is the brain, so that's the seat of the soul type of deal.
Well, I've known.
But is it? Most of the motherfuckers just thinking with their dicks.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say. I've known a lot of dudes that I'm pretty sure the brain isn't the seat of their.
That's what I was thinking of. I was like, these scientists are mostly thinking with their dicks. Why are they fucking focusing on?
It actually surprised. What I'm not saying. I would be surprised actually now that you bring it up.
Yeah.
That somebody somewhere didn't come out with that back in the day.
Yeah, it's called cockology.
Yeah, cockology or schlongology.
Cockiography.
That sounds even better.
Yeah.
That sounds fancy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's where they're saying that it's like,
right.
Well, because there was a whole bunch of different, because you had phrenology, which was like your skull bumps, and then you had physiognomy, which was your facial features, and then you also had what was it called, anthropometry. Yeah. That was like your other rest of your body. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. There was a bunch of shit like that because there was a bunch of pseudosciences right around this time where it's like, well, obviously your outer body can tell us everything about your personality. So I'm surprised no one did a dick-centric version.
Yeah.
Or a vagina-centric version. Well, no one would do a vagina-centric version because no one gave a crap about women back then.
Their vaginas wandered back then. They had to wander.
That's right, the wandering womb. I hate when that happens. She just pops right out and walks around. She goes up to fucking Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know what she's up to.
I'm listening. I'm imagining this shit. I mean, those like from those old black and white movies like Frankenstein, where they got the theater there with the seats like bleachers that go all the way up there. They can look down on the operating room. Yeah. Imagine they got these poor motherfuckers. They're pulling them out in fucking robes and shit to tell them to fucking rock up in front of everybody. Okay, subject number A. Okay, rock up. Okay.
You can rock up.
He gets out calipers and shit.
Yeah.
And he starts measuring, and he's telling the audience about this dude and his dick, and just.
It's like
Zach,
this one has like
Zach
a little
would be
bit of
showing
a,
up. He'd be in the front row.
a little bit of a vein on this side,
Yeah, so
and
what
it's a
that
little
means
bit
is-
thin around. So what this means
Yeah.
is that he's inclined to usury.
Yeah.
Or
And
something.
this dude's just trying his fucking hardest to stay rocked up and shit in front of all these fucking dudes. It's fucking. It's like some shit.
You have to do it for science.
Yeah, for science.
I mean, we should.
Man.
Oh my god, we should totally start that and like say it's a real thing, and then maybe they'll start doing that on TikTok
Yeah.
as though it's real, because they seem dumb enough to have started doing physiognomy again.
Yeah.
It's like, it was so funny because I was watching a little bit of a documentary about it earlier, about the thing where a lot of people have gotten into this on TikTok. And somebody in the comments said, "Ooh, the TikTok girlies discovered eugenics." And I was like, "Yeah, pretty much."
Zach's down there talking.
Isn't that special? Pecorology.
Pecorology.
Pecorology 101.
Yeah. Pecorology.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Ben says there were scientists measuring testicles. Yeah, there were.
Were there?
And actually, I don't know if we ever did a show about the guy, but he was a quack doctor. Was he? He wasn't even a real doctor. I read a book about him. But he was the guy that was putting goat testicles in people.
Yeah, no,
Remember
we gotta
that
do a
dude?
show about that bitch.
I want to do a show about him too. Well, and this is like weird and random, but he's also like a pioneer of radio. He was like the first guy that did like radio advertising.
Yeah,
He owned his own radio station and stuff. It's a crazy
I
fucking
want
story.
you dudes to imagine something.
It's a crazy story.
They were always looking for testosterone, always for different reasons. But they were trying to get something like HRT or hormone replacement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And this quack comes up, well, let's just fucking put a fucking goat testicle in a dude's sack.
Yeah, like we're gonna cut open
Like,
your
that'll be
scrot.
okay. We're not
and
even going
put-
to connect it to anything. We're not even going to connect the blood vessels. Just put it in there.
He wasn't a doctor,
Fuck,
obviously.
could you imagine that? Having that in your nutsack, a third nut of a goat rotting in there. Your body trying to attack it. That's what this dude was trying.
Well, yeah, and a couple of the people died
course
because
they
they
would
didn't
die, yeah.
understand immunology or anything back
Man.
then.
Fuck.
I'm like, you know, that's not
Makes
how
me
that's
wanna
gonna
fucking
work,
cross
right?
my legs and fucking go and
I
go
know,
high,
doesn't
and
it
I'm
just
like,
make?
oh.
I don't blame you. I don't even have testicles, and like I read that book and I was like, fuck. Oh, why would you do that?
Yeah.
How fucking desperate you have to be
Yeah.
to
One
fuck
of the-
your wife that you would
one of
like.
these days
Yeah,
I'm-
cut open my scrot and put some goat
Yeah.
testicles in there. What the fuck,
One
man?
of these days I'm gonna
Calm
get
down.
one of these days I'm gonna get my hands on some. It's easy to get. I'm gonna get me a saline bag, it's a fucking fucking
God.
medical grade saline. I'm gonna do a fucking IV drip into my nutsack. That's just gonna get that shit about big as a grapefruit. I'm not
Is
gonna
that-
tell Jen. I'm just gonna fucking pop that shit out on her.
Well,
She's
I'm gonna notice. I mean, I'm not sure if you know.
And then the next day, your dick is like the size of a fucking tennis ball can or a Pringles can. That's how it's like. That's how it is.
I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm just gonna let
Be
you
hitting
do
her in the
that.
back of the head with it.
And then if something goes wrong with
We
it,
get some
I'm
videos.
just gonna point and laugh
We'll make some videos with that shit. You'll be sitting there
because
talking seriously, like reading the news, and I come up behind you and fucking drop it on your fucking shoulder
I'll be doing something.
like a parrot.
I can imagine you
Just
just
some
be in
funny
there in
shit.
the bed, like watching YouTube or something. You just
Yeah,
nuts
just
would be just
pulling
like
shit.
out that like that.
Look, man, it's just getting too dirty. We gotta get back to shit. Been drinking too much.
Oracle says,
That'd be
just you
funny.
wait. Soon butt prints will be the new pseudoscience.
Yeah,
I'm surprised
yeah.
that hasn't happened already, to be honest with you. I'm sure it's out there. Like anything that we can think of, I'm sure it's been done by some idiot someplace. So let's talk about his original 27 organs in the brain. And these were all in different places. You can look at like charts of where they were. It doesn't really matter because it's all made up. But these were the original organs that he had. So if you had bumps at whatever fucking place in the brain this was supposed to be, that meant this was like stronger in you, right? So one of the organs was impulse to propagation, which I'm guessing is wanting to fuck. That's what that is. Faculty of language was one of them. Tenderness for the offspring, or parental love, like love for your kids. Disposition for coloring, not coloring like in a coloring book, but like delight in colors. Like, I guess, like aesthetics, something like looking at colors or whatever. Friendly attachment or fidelity. Sense for sounds and musical talent. Valor or self-defense. Arithmetic, counting and time. Murder, carnivorousness. So there was a murder part of your brain. That was softened a little bit later, which we'll talk about. Mechanical skill, sense of cunning. Comparative perspicuity, sagacity, like wisdom. Larceny, sense of property. So I guess, knowing this is my land, but I also want to take yours. Metaphysical perspicuity, in other words, clearness of insight or judgment. Pride, arrogance, love of authority. Wit, causality, sense of inference. Ambition and vanity. Poetic talent. Circumspection. Good nature, compassion, and moral sense. Aptness to receive an education. Mimic, that was one of them. Sense of locality, I guess that's sense of your space, of your body in space, maybe. Theosophy, sense of God and religion. Recollection of persons. Perseverance and firmness. Faculty for words, and verbal memory. So, like I said, it's not crazy. He's not too far off, because there are different areas of the brain that are associated with certain things like that, but he's being real specific. And like I said, I don't know, I'm not sure how he entirely came up with where exactly, because really all he did was look at a bunch of skulls and look at some people in an insane asylum with bumps on their heads, and from that came up with this whole system of 27 different personality traits.
What year was this again?
This was late 1700s, early 1800s.
So Darwin hasn't even arrived yet.
That's what I was saying.
They're still basing this shit on animal breeding.
Yeah.
You know, they know a lot about animal breeding, but it's a vague concept at this point. They're not really keeping good data about what color horse is produced if you fucking, mate this color horse with another one, was the fur. Like, they're not, that never worked for cats, because it's not really it's not real reliable with cats. Not all the time, unless it's a specific breed of cat. I think it took a long time to make those. Like Siamese cats make other Siamese cats, but in general, just regular unbred wild, regular domestic cats, they're whatever color
they have
seem
all
to
kind
want
of
to be. Yeah,
crazy shit.
So they know things like that. They're just trying to apply it to humans, because they have, in general, they haven't done the fucking work. That's the difference. But they don't really know the method yet. At this point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is very early days.
Yeah.
And the fact that, what I was saying earlier is that the fact that he came out in the early 1800s and 19 of his organs in the brain, which are bullshit, but, okay, he's on the right track, sort of. 19 of his organs, he said, were also in other animals. So the fact that he said that many years before Darwin, that's kind of... That's kind of ahead of his time a little bit.
Reasoning. There's got to be a place to process his vision. There's got to be a place that processes fucking auditory and sound. Got to be a place that processes taste. You know what I mean? Got to be a place that processes thought.
Although he didn't have that in there.
He's doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
which isn't dumb when you think about it.
That's correct. All that's happening. It's just that they haven't done the actual physical work to cut animals apart while they're alive and take things out and see what it is they can't do anymore. When really, look, to be honest, that shit really didn't come about until fucking the Holocaust, when the Germans were cutting people people apart when they were alive, and talking to them as they were cutting parts of the brain to see what had changed. That's human experimentation.
That's not entirely true. Actually, one of the things that was the downfall of phrenology was particularly a very famous case that was an autopsy that was done by Paul Broca on a dude, and I was going to talk about that later, who had lost his ability to speak.
Yeah.
And when he autopsied him, they thought it was this one. He's like, think of it like a phrenologist, and he's like, well, this section of the brain, should be fucked up because he couldn't talk anymore, and that was fucked up.
Yeah.
And from that point on, they were like, okay, well, obviously, different parts of the brain do different things. So that was, probably 1840s, 1850s. So this was going on like way before.
Yeah. I maybe rephrase what I said, what I meant. My understanding is that the brain wasn't really totally mapped out until the Holocaust, when they were actually cutting people alive apart. That's the way I heard it.
Yeah,
I don't know certain areas.
I think
because
that's
that
a
one
pretty.
Dude had the damn fucking metal rod blown through his head.
Yeah, Phineas Gage.
So there's shit like that, but the Germans went in there on purpose to cut things apart, to figure out what did what, and there were big fucking pharmaceutical and medical industries behind them, funding them to do that, and a lot of those were still around today, or at least around for a while.
I'm just saying. No, what I was saying was that it is a very common it's a very common thing that people think that, brain science didn't really progress until after World War II, which is kind of true, but not really. There were a lot of people doing shit prior to that. So it's not like it came out of nowhere. Like, people knew shit that was going on, like, before that. You know what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying.
The highest priority thing that they were doing during the biological experiments that the Germans were doing in World War II is trying to figure out how to induce twin births. That was what they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted fertility drugs where a woman could have fucking 5 kids in a single birth, like Octomom and shit. They wanted that. Yeah. They never got it though. Never figured it out.
They couldn't figure shit out.
It was too primitive. The technology was too primitive.
Zach says, speaking of aesthetics, Jen, I've got real into Aubrey Beardsley's art lately. You familiar with him? Yes, I am. I love Aubrey Beardsley's stuff. Really, really cool. Actually, if you like Edward Gorey, Aubrey Beardsley was obviously before that, but it's kind of a similar-ish style, but a little more like Art Nouveau, I want to say. But yeah, I really like Aubrey Beardsley's stuff. So yeah, so those were the 27 organs that he came up with. So, as I said, Gall and Spurzheim have been on this tour. And then they ended the tour in 1807. And then Gall, actually, he was older, so he retired at this point. But Spurzheim kept on going. So he kind of became the standard bearer, I guess, for phrenology at this point. So he started doing lecture tours on his own. So he did one in Britain that was very, very successful. But the thing about it, like I said, even in this era, and when he did the tour in Britain, it was 1813. Even in 1813, a lot of scientists were calling bullshit on it. When he got to Edinburgh, in Scotland, there was a doctor named John Gordon. And he wrote a scathing rebuke of phrenology. He called it, quote-unquote, thorough quackery from beginning to end, which he was right about that. And says, and we are persuaded that every intelligent person who takes the trouble to read a single chapter of the volume before us will view them precisely in the same light. So he just thought it was a bunch of crap. And like I said, there were other very prominent scientists at the time, like Georges Cuvier, the very famous French scientist and also white supremacist. He also thought that it was bullshit. So, because of the thing that John Gordon had written, saying that it was quackery, Spurzheim decides he's going to go to Edinburgh and debate him, So, he goes to debate him, and he does a bunch of lectures there, too. And it turned out that the scientific community, some of the scientific community, as well as the public in Edinburgh, thought phrenology was pretty fucking cool. So it ended up being Edinburgh ended up being a real kind of hub of phrenology for a long time. And honestly, one of the lectures that Spurzheim did in Edinburgh, there was a guy there who was a lawyer, and his name was George. It's either Combe or Coombe. I'm not sure. It only has one O in it, but I've heard it pronounced both ways, and it's Scottish, so I'm not entirely sure. I know we have some Scottish people around here, so you can tell me, but I've heard it pronounced Combe and Coombe. It looks like comb to me, but I'm not sure. So he was listening to one of the lectures, and he thought, again, phrenology was super cool. So much so that he started a whole society in Edinburgh in 1820 and started publishing journals and stuff like that about it. And he kind of became, again, another standard bearer of the pseudoscience, moving forward. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure what the reasoning behind it was, but Gall, the guy that originally came up with the idea, and Spurzheim, who was his, protege, I guess, they had some kind of fight about something, and they didn't talk anymore, after 1812. And after this point, Spurzheim starts kind of doing his own take, I guess, his own riff on phrenology, adding his own shit. And one of the things that he did, he wanted to make it more palatable, I guess, to a popular audience, which Gall never really seemed to have much interest in. So he renamed some of the organs to make them sound less, for example, remember how I said earlier that Gall had an organ that was called the murder organ, basically. murder and carnivorousness, he basically called it the destructiveness organ, because that's a little less. That's a little softer. It's not. Nobody wants to say we have a big murder organ. You know what I mean? Like this big party. I don't know what party you had it was.
And he's probably just naming out a random area on the brain, right?
I'm guessing because, like I said, this has no basis in reality.
Right.
I'm sure that he was getting the idea from someplace.
Yeah, and psychology wasn't around yet, so
Not really.
Freud hasn't been around, so they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They just want to know what makes a person violent.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that just from his limited, stash of skulls, he was like, oh, well, this skull was from a murderer, and he has a big bump right here, and then this other skull was from a murderer, and he also kind of has a bump there, so that must be where the murder organ is.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm sure it was probably like 1 or 2 skulls. And like some of those skulls, I'm sure he probably didn't even know who the fuck the person was.
Or mistaken identity.
Or what their personality was.
Yeah.
So it's like, how would you can't extrapolate anything from that, is what I'm saying. Like, there's so many factors that he's not considering. So yeah. And the thing about it with Spurzheim, like I said, Gall seemed more like the science guy. He was just interested in doing the science, even though he did it wrong. But Spurzheim seemed more like science guy, but also how can we popularize this? So he was more of like a science guy, but also like a marketing guy. So he's like, so we're going to take these organs, we're going to give them different names so it doesn't sound as bad. And we're also going to say that people can, you're born with this skull like that with your head all bumpy and everything. But it's not fatalistic. Like, you can change it. Like, you can exercise parts of your brain that you want to get bigger.
Yeah, you're gonna compensate.
Yeah, so he's making it more like a self-help thing, which obviously is going to appeal a lot more to the public because people love simple solutions to shit and things that sound like they're going to help them.
And he's pulling this directly out of his ass.
All of this is pulled out of their ass.
There's no way he could know any of this.
No, of course not. But if you just kind of went around, hey, I'm a smart white man, and I'm just gonna like tell all these people I'm gonna lay some knowledge on you. Oh, I suppose so. Like, you know what I mean?
It's called an argument from authority.
Yeah,
and that goes all the way back to Galen. All right, the Roman. Right. Although he actually did have some work to back up some of the stuff that he did, injury and.
Yeah, they're not entirely wrong.
But once you feel like you're an authority, you start fucking saying whatever you want to say. That's fucking my take on once you're an authority. But here's the thing: the authorities were full of shit.
Well, the thing about
it's always changing.
Yeah, well, that's its nature.
Yeah.
It's supposed to change.
Yeah.
It's supposed to. That's why argument from authority is like a big fallacy that they teach you against when you learn the scientific method and stuff like that. Is because they're like, we can't. You have to be able to like abandon ideas that are not working anymore. Yeah. If you get too attached to the person that came up with the idea, then that's obviously not scientific. You're just following them like a guru or whatever, and you can't do that.
So in other words, what she's saying, fucking Albert Einstein could show up, and if he starts talking shit,
if he says some bullshit, he could still be wrong.
He could be wrong, and he's got to back it up.
Everyone can be wrong.
He's got to back it up with actual fucking work on paper.
Exactly.
Prove it.
Exactly. And that's true of anybody, whoever they are. If you don't have the shit to back it up, if you don't have the data to back it up, then it doesn't matter who you are.
Bitch can't just show up and say, I'm Albert motherfucking Einstein, this is how it is. You can't do it. It's not enough. You got to prove it.
Uh-huh. And other people have to test your shit.
Yeah.
And make sure that you're right before that. But just for the fact of you, and the fact that you came up with a couple of brilliant ideas, doesn't mean you're going to come up with brilliant shit always. Like I said, Isaac Newton, genius, came up with brilliant ideas, also believed in alchemy. Also believed in alchemy.
Yeah, alchemy, yeah.
So, which is obviously wrong.
It's obviously, although you could say it's the predecessor to chemistry.
Sure, it is.
But it's not really. You can tell just the way it's organized. They're talking about spiritual forces.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. But see, that's the thing. You can't, and that's why I find that the history of science so interesting, and the way that it interacted with religion. I mean, by necessity, because religion was so powerful. So it kind of had a pussyfoot around. But the thing, I always found that like really interesting because, I don't know, because there were all these scientists that had these, what we would call archaic ideas, But sometimes those archaic ideas, and this happened with phrenology too, like obviously the shit that he came up with about, oh, bumps on your skull, like that means your personality, is bullshit. But the shit he came up with about, different parts of the brain, having different functions, that's correct. So just because you had one dumbass idea, that doesn't mean you can't be right about something else, and vice versa. Just because you were right about one thing, that doesn't mean you're right about other things. So, like I said, that's why you can't get too, you can't listen too much to just like one person if they don't have anything to like back it up. Even if they've come up with like brilliant shit before, that doesn't mean that the shit that they're talking about now is correct. They have to have data to back it up always. So, as I said before, this Scottish guy that came there, George Combe, or Combe, I'm just going to call him Combe because I'm not sure how you pronounce it. So, he was at one of Spurzheim's lectures. So he kind of, again, takes up the mantle. And he took it even further into kind of what we would call like a pop psychology framework, I guess. He kind of simplified the whole thing, and he kind of made it more, I don't want to say he made it political, but he made it kind of line up more with, the context of the era, the political, way that shit was going in the era. And the book that he wrote about it sold like 200,000 copies, which was like a big deal because books were not cheap back then. And he also, in this book that he wrote, which was like a big bestseller, he also took pains to reconcile phrenology with religion because, as I said, that was kind of a big thing because the Catholic Church, the ruling religious authorities didn't like it because they thought it was materialistic, because it's saying, the seat of personality, the seat of a person's morality is in their brain and not in their soul. So he kind of tried to, smooth that over a little bit, which, again, made it a lot more popular. And another thing that he did, which I'll get into because I kind of want to say some of his stuff that he came up with the organs, because he added more, because of course he did. One thing that he did in his work was that he pointed out all of these organs, like, that did certain things. But he made it so that none of the organs were inherently bad. Like, he didn't have a murder organ, for example. But he would have an organ for, like I said, like destructiveness, but he would have, like, a positive and a negative connotation of that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that kind of thing made it a lot more popular with the public because they're like, well, he's like not making a moral judgment necessarily. That it's like, well, you have this big bump here. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a criminal, for example. But if you abuse that area of your brain, it does, So it was, that's why it was a lot more popular with the public, like I said. So the stuff that he came up with, I'm not going to go through all of it because he had like 35 of them, I think. So like I said, he added a bunch. But he had stuff like, just for an example, he had one of his organs was called combativeness, okay?
That was an organ?
That was an organ called combativeness. If you had a bump in your skull where that was...
So there's 30-something organs that we said?
Yeah, 35. Okay. That's how many he was. 27 was the original number.
There's far fewer.
But he's added up.
Yeah, he doesn't realize. Okay, he doesn't know how the system actually works.
Yeah, so he says combativeness. So he says now positive uses, if you have a bump in your skull in the combativeness area, positive uses, courage to meet danger and overcome difficulties, tendency to defend, to oppose an attack, and to resist unjust encroachments, which all sounds good. However, it also has a bad side. So you can use it for good or evil. So like I said, he's not making any moral judgments, which is why this was popular.
He's now starting to get into basically fortune telling.
Well, that's all this was. I don't think that, obviously, Gall, the guy that started it, he did not think of it that way. Yeah. But that's essentially what, it's palm reading. There is really no difference.
All right.
But they didn't, like I said, they didn't think of it that way. They thought they were doing science, but no. But like I said, the heyday of this was not very long. And even scientists at the time were like, this is basically like palmistry is what this is. You're fortune telling. Yeah. But yeah, so if you have the combativeness thing, if it was bad, so abuses of it would mean love of contention. You're just argumentative for the sake of being argumentative. Tendency to provoke an assault. So he had each thing that was a positive and a negative connotation.
So it sounds like his organs weren't based on actual functions; they were based on attributes. So in other words,
well, the first ones were too.
So what you're going to say is he's got a horny organ in there.
Well, there was
Or
one.
something
Let's
like
see.
that.
What the first one was
Yeah.
amativeness, which
Yeah.
was sexual
Yeah.
desire.
Okay. So just anything. Oh man.
Adhesiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. You being clingy. That's an organ.
Yeah, the clingy organ. Appetite for food, which is
Yeah, it's
one
organ.
that Gall did not have.
So he's not even breaking it down to the very basics of just like vision, sensory input,
Well, let me
fucking
see.
memory.
Acquisitiveness, constructiveness, self-esteem, love of approbation,
Yeah.
cautiousness, benevolence, veneration, firmness, conscientiousness, hope, wonder, ideality, wit, imitation, feeling, touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight. So he had that all in one
Yeah.
area.
But there's no like R complex where you're fucking all your animal drives and your fucking you know what I mean, your reptilian core. He's not really talking about that.
No,
He's
he
got
basically
everything
just
all
has,
separated in these little bitty fucking things.
yeah, which, like I said, is not correct.
No instincts or drives and
It's
fucking-
fun though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
fun. So he had like language, time, eventuality, numbers, causality. So he has like ones like that. And then, incidentally, there was a scientist named H. Lundy, and he wrote a book in 1844, kind of after phrenology had kind of started to go on the wane. And he wrote a book called The Phrenological Mirror, and he had all the same ones that Combe had, but he also added 4 more newly discovered organs.
Yeah.
which
Just discovered these.
I just pulled these
Yeah.
right out of there. And these are kind of hilarious. They were independence, comicality,
Okay.
which I guess they had a wit one. Why is that different? Velocity,
How fast you are.
I guess. I'm walking real fast today. Velocity and grotesque was the other one.
So it's funny. There's no concept of like a few organs that are producing emergent properties that you would know.
No, they did not have
They didn't
that
understand
concept at all.
There's no emergent property concept.
No.
Everything that you do, there's got to be a specific fucking.
It was
place
very
for that.
one-to-one.
Yeah,
Like
right.
very literal.
Right.
Which, like I said, I'm not shitting on them too much because they didn't understand. You know, we don't entirely understand how the brain works.
Yeah.
It's complicated. They were working within their limitations. Okay, like they knew kind of that the brain did certain things, and they kind of knew that different parts did certain things. But it's like they didn't really know anything about neurons, or they didn't really know about connective. They didn't really know anything like that.
Yeah, and they would never even imagine anything like a fucking quantum field
Right,
or
that's
anything
what I
like
mean.
that. They wouldn't know
So,
what that was.
you know, it was kind of, they were just working within their limitations. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's, you know, you can't shit on them too much, but they didn't come up with shit. That's all. So Spurzheim came to the United States for a lecture tour in 1832, and this event caught, because man, the Americans were all about this shit. Because we had all that stupid snake oil shit going on over here, but the spiritualism, mesmerism, like all that kind of crap, that was all going on here. So this fit right in. He came here, and the intellectual community, the academics and stuff like that, were just like super into it. Oh my god, like they invited him to like speak at Yale and all this other kind of stuff. So he comes here. He's here for 3 months, and then he gets typhoid fever and he dies. So there's that. But his ideas had spread so much in that brief time that a bunch of kind of the academics in Boston started, phrenological societies of their own. And they did not like, because by this point, this is 1832, by this point, phrenology had kind of been, in Europe, it was kind of maybe sorta like seen as a legitimate science for a very brief time, but by the time 1832-ish, 1840s rolled around, it was kind of seen as like fortune telling. And like a lot of people are like, nah, that's bullshit. You know what I mean? So nobody was really taking it all that seriously anymore.
Even back then, they were like, how could they know?
Right, yeah. Like even back then, people were like, nah, I don't think so. But still, like in the US though, I guess they didn't go through all of that, like as they had already gone through in Europe. So they were still taking it very seriously here. And the academic elite at this point were like, we don't like the whole pop psychology aspect of it that had been going on in Europe because it got really, really popular because it was like I said, like fortune telling, and it was kind of like self-help. So they're like, this is very serious. You know, this should just be for us. This should just be for doctors and scientists and blah, blah, blah. So there was that kind of thing. Now, so there was another guy around this time named Adolf Quetelet, I think is how you pronounce his name. So I'm sure that's probably wrong. But as I said earlier, there was like a big, in the scientific zeitgeist of this time, there was a big thing about like trying to determine what a person's personality was like from their outward features. You know, you had the thing with physiognomy with the face, and you also had something that this Adolf Quetelet guy came up with, where you could like measure parts of the human body and like find like statistical averages. Now, Combe at this stage was like, oh, nobody's applied actual mathematics and statistics to phrenology before, because they're just, like I said, pulling stuff out of their butt. So he's like, well, maybe we should do that to make it more like legitimate. So he actually started applying a more mathematical, more rigorous statistical framework, sort of, to phrenology. So he was the one that kind of started doing the stuff with the calipers and all that kind of stuff, and making like statistical analyses of different brain sizes and things of that nature, which they hadn't really done before. They were just kind of looking at two skulls and being like, yeah, that looks like a bump in this, you know what I mean? It's just like, it was kind of vague like that. So they did that. And so, like I said, phrenology like really took off in the US. Everybody, like, it kind of became this big, huge thing. All these scientists got into it. They all started doing their own little organ things with charts and blah, blah, blah. And again, just like it had happened in Europe, it started going a little bit pop psychology. Because what happened in the US was that while the scientists were like, this is a totally serious science and we need to just keep this between us, y'all, there were two brothers, the Fowlers, and they saw this phrenology thing and they're like, we can make some fucking bank on that. So what they did, Orson and Lorenzo Fowler were their names. Now they actually heard about phrenology when they were at college, and saw dollar signs. And again, there was a lot of other like pseudoscience-y shit that was real popular at this time. So they said, well, we can obviously like kind of make some money out of this. Sure. So we're gonna like do some money off of this. So they started doing lectures about it. They had a shop in New York where they started bringing in books about it, and they would start doing phrenology readings. So they would have people come in and they'd feel your head, and then they would give you this cool little like printout. It wasn't a printout, obviously they didn't have printers back then, but they had a little thing that like where they told you where the bumps in your skull were and like what your personality was. It was like a horoscope, essentially, is what they were giving you.
So this is kind of like the genesis of Scientology.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like that. And so, and it became, and phrenology, under their thing, I mean, there were other people doing it too, but they were like the most famous ones, and they were the ones that came up with the porcelain bust. That was very famous. If you Google phrenology, that's one of the first pictures that comes up, is one of these white porcelain busts with the blue stuff on it. It even Fowler Brothers, like on the back, like a logo. So they were the ones that came up with it, and people would come to them and come to the shop just like you would come to a fortune teller. They're asked like, well, what job should I do? Like, because of the bumps in my skull, or who should I marry? Who should I just, you know what I mean? So it was that kind of shit. And it was exactly like fortune telling, just like all the scientists in Europe had said. They were correct about that. And they also did, the Fowlers, they started a journal that initially was kind of geared more toward like the medical community, but then they were like, they could probably make more money off of like more popular audience. So they started gearing it more toward just the regular people, and started printing articles about, political, issues of the day and things of that nature. Interestingly, one of the Fowlers, Lorenzo's wife, Lydia, was, fun fact, only the second woman in the United States, after the very famous Elizabeth Blackwell, to get a medical degree in the U.S. So there was that. And Orson Fowler was one of the people responsible for making octagonal houses popular for a time in the United States. So they were a prominent family, is what I'm saying. Now, so the thing about it at this stage, in the U.S., even though it still has this kind of fortune-telling kind of veneer to it, I guess, but they still did have like a lot of serious scientists that were adherents. And there were actually, I think the phrenological societies in the U.S., I think they were around until maybe the 1950s, I want to say. So it's not like, I don't know how many people were in them, but... so it's, so it didn't go away for like a long time. But like, for example, there was a dude named John Elliotson who was a heart specialist, and he got into phrenology in the 1840s, which, like I said, which was kind of when it was on the decline, and he mixed it with mesmerism, because of course he did, which was another kind of pseudoscience going around at the time. And he made this whole thing called phrenomesmerism. And he thought, well, that would be cool because you can mesmerize people and put them in a trance, and then you can manipulate the organs in their brain, like for them to have the personality that you want. So it's win-win. You know what I mean? Combining those two things. But yeah. So, I mean...
You're going to reprogram
it kind of makes sense.
With mesmerism.
If you're an idiot. Well, you know what I mean. So it made sense in the context of the time, I guess. And the thing about it is that you have to think it around this time period, like science was... in its relative infancy, I guess, like at least the scientific method was. And people were, maybe not to the extent that they are nowadays, but they were kind of like looking for other solutions to things. Like people weren't as mired in religion as they used to be. It was they were kind of drifting away from that. So, and it seemed like some scientific discoveries were kind of blowing people's minds, and they're like, oh, it's this whole... it's this whole new world opening up, and maybe we can solve all these problems with it. So I kind of feel like phrenology was kind of along those lines. It's like, now we're just going to be able to like look at people's heads and tell if that's a murderer or whatever. Like, so you can see why people...
So they thought that they could solve people's spiritual problems with pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Is what
I mean, they didn't think of it that way, I guess. But that's
really
essentially what it was.
Right. Religion wasn't giving them what they needed. This was offering or promising more.
And I will note, too, that as time went on and phrenology was used to excuse and back up various, racist and colonialist, theories, was that I think to an extent it made people feel better about, for example, slavery, if they had some kind of quote-unquote scientific evidence back. Oh, well, phrenology says that black people's skulls say that they are tameable, which is something that was actually in one of the books at the time.
I didn't see much evidence of that.
So it's okay that we're enslaving them. So the fact is, phrenology was obviously not the only pseudoscience that was used for this. There's a whole fucking thing about all these different sciences that were used to justify this kind of crap. But phrenology was definitely one of them, if not like the main one. So I kind of feel like it was also used as a justification for subjugating races that were not them. You know what I mean? That's just the truth of it. So the thing about it, like I said, the 1840s came along, and by that time, there had been scientists the whole time. They were like, we think this is bullshit. But by the time the 1840s rolled around, particularly in Europe, phrenology had kind of started to lose its steam somewhat, mostly because it didn't seem like a real science. I mean, it's like, how many organs does the brain have? 27, 40? Because all these phrenologists were coming out with different numbers, and they all had different ones. And it's like they were all in different spots. And it's like there really wasn't any evidence to back up any of this stuff. You know what I mean? It's just, it didn't make any sense to people, so it just kind of started falling apart. I love that if you've never read Ambrose Bierce's The Devil's Dictionary, it's hilarious still to this day. I find it hilarious anyway. And he had a definition for phrenology in there, and his definition for phrenology was the science of picking the pocket through the scalp. It consists in locating and exploiting the organ that one is a dupe with.
Yeah, yeah.
Ambrose Bierce was a funny
Yeah,
ass
he got it
dude.
right.
Was a funny ass
He
dude.
got it right, yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, if you haven't read the Devil's Dictionary, please read
Science
it.
of getting money
Like
out of you.
it's like a dictionary, but everything is like smart ass definitions of like all the words, and it's like super funny.
Yeah, yeah. When did that come about?
That was 18. I don't remember when the Devil's Dictionary came out.
Okay.
1800s for sure.
Okay, yeah.
Ambrose Bierce wrote some fucking great fucking horror stories.
So people
too.
saw through this bullshit.
Oh, they did. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, by what mechanism could they prove any of this?
Well, that's what a lot of
See,
people
that-
were saying. It's just kind of like, well,
yeah. They haven't cut into any living people's heads
yeah.
to see how any of this works. They're making this shit up, and fucking people that had intelligence knew. But what's so funny is that during this period, you had intelligent people that were duped by this shit.
Yeah.
Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote fucking all those fucking
Sherlock Holmes
books, he was convinced that seances were real.
Oh yeah. Him and
Yeah.
Houdini had like a huge falling out about that.
Yeah, because he liked Houdini, and Houdini was
Yeah,
like,
they
"No,
were
man."
friends.
You're like, no, that's fake. He's like, no, you can't be saying that the seances are fake. That's just real as a motherfucker. What are you talking about?
He believed in the Cottingley fairies too.
Yeah. Those little fairies, which was a little girl who took ice cream sticks and put paper cutouts of fairies and painted them and took photographs of them.
And fooled Arthur
Well,
Conan Doyle.
yeah, and she would sit there with these little things, and it did look like they were moving because they were blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course they're
Just the
fairies.
simplest shit.
They're fairies because fairies are real because that's British, and fucking the British. That's gonna tell you that it's true.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
That like he actually thought that was
Yeah. So it's wild, man. People didn't know what was possible. It hadn't really been
It
settled.
was a
yet.
less cynical age.
Yeah, it's a less cynical age. Yeah.
I mean, there were cynical motherfuckers like me, like going back in time, like forever. But
Well,
the thing about Houdini,
was also
and
like,
Houdini is like actually a big personal hero of mine.
Yeah.
The thing about Houdini, though, he wasn't. I mean, he was essentially. I don't know if I'd call him an atheist, but he was pretty skeptical of this kind of crap. But the thing about it was that he wanted it to be true.
Yeah.
He just knew that it probably wasn't.
Houdini was from the world of entertainment. He knew that a lot of everything in entertainment is a trick or an illusion, and it's a show. And he was just like, yeah, a lot of these fucking so-called sciences, they're doing the same thing I'm doing. Okay, I could do that. I could make that shit. So he knew.
That's why I always thought that magicians are the best debunkers of pseudoscience, because they know, and that's why James Randi was so good at what he did, because he was a magician for decades and decades, so he knew all the tricks.
How to trick rubes.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's like, these people that are claiming to have supernatural powers and be psychic and stuff like that, they're not doing anything that a magician couldn't do. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? He's like, and if I can do it, he's like, at least I'm being honest about being a magician and fooling you. They're saying that it's real. You know what I mean?
What's even better than a magician is a mentalist.
Yeah, well, it's similar. That's what I mean.
I've had a mentalist do shit to me through the television set, where he's like fucking, he's getting ready to unveil something behind a fucking curtain, and fucking he keeps telling you what it's, he's getting close to telling you what it was, and before he fucking opened it, he goes, and I know that many of you in the audience, you know what it is. It's a bicycle. And then he fucking opens it, and I go, yeah, because I was thinking it's a bicycle. And fucking the fucking curtain
he made
comes
you
back,
think that.
and curtain comes back, and yeah, it was a bicycle. And I was just watching it on television, and it was because he said a bunch of words in a certain pattern that rhymed with bicycle.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a pretty common trick.
Right.
They
But
can
very
make
effective.
you. It is very effective.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they still use it, because
Yeah.
it works. Because they know how people's brains work, and
Yeah.
most people's brains work more or less similarly. So it's like, so they know that if I say this series of words, or if I put these ideas in people's heads, then
These images.
most people
Yeah.
will come to the same
Come to the same
conclusion. Not
conclusion
everybody,
that
obviously.
it's a bicycle.
But yeah,
And there it was a.
And then
I was
everybody's
going
like-
that's a bicycle.
everybody's like,
That's a
"Wow,
bicycle."
magical."
Yeah, and it was a bicycle.
Yeah.
And it was because of what he said. He suggested it. That was a bicycle.
Well, and a lot of what they used to do too, like, because I remember this, they used to do the mentalists and stuff would be on shows, and they'd be like, they could know what number you were, and they would do like all these mathematical things. And the thing about it was, when I was a kid, I used to have this massive book of magic tricks. And one of the ones that they would do is they would give you like all of these mathematical things, and it's like it would always come to the same number.
Yeah.
So it's like you knew you were going to get that number. You know what I mean? So it's not like a big mystery or anything. But yeah, so there's always a trick. It's not magic or nothing like that. I don't mean to shit on anybody's cornflakes or anything. But yeah. So like I said, phrenology, it wasn't all bad because some of the ideas that they came up with, for example, the brain having different areas for different functions, that turned out to be correct, and that actually did kind of help progress neuroscience as we know it today. It was kind of the first one to come up with that. But one of the reasons that it fell apart was as people started, dissecting brains and of people that had certain, disabilities and things like that, and started noticing particular things. One particular case, which happened in 1840, there was a guy whose name was Louis Le Borgne, I guess, and I think I mentioned this earlier, he was 30 years old, and he started having a hard time talking, and then as time went by, he lost his ability to speak entirely, and he couldn't talk for like the next couple decades of his life. Now after he died, Paul Broca, very famous French physician, did an autopsy, and because he knew about phrenology and had some, I don't know if he was a big phrenology believer, but it was kind of still in the in the air at that time. So he's like, well, I'm gonna look at this like I would look at, like a phrenologist, you know what I mean? So he did the autopsy, and he's like, okay, well, I'm going to look at a portion of the brain. If he's not talking, then it must be this portion of the brain that there's something wrong with. And when he did the autopsy, he did indeed find that. This area of the brain is now called Broca's area. It's still called that to this day. And so that was the thing that said, yeah, the cerebral localization theory that phrenology kind of came up with, that is correct, okay? Other than that, not so much. But as I said, it was also used, and I don't think that Gall, the guy that came up with phrenology, I don't think this was in his intention. I don't think he was trying to, I think he was just trying to come up with a framework for, saying like an outward appearance, and we can tell what your personality is like by the form of your brain, which, like I said, he's not totally wrong, but it was later used to justify all kinds of terrible things. And George Combe, the guy that I was talking about earlier, the Scottish guy, he published a book in 1825, I think it was, and he had in there that he had like illustrations of different races and their head sizes, and then he would put in like animal skulls in a way that kind of implied that Africans were like animals and like not like white people.
Yeah.
So like I said, they started making like moral judgments about what people's skulls looked like. And the more that went on, the more it was used to like the subsequent scientists would take it further and further, to a point where they were justifying the subjugation of certain races because they were quote unquote inferior. We'll note that the Nazis fucking loved this shit.
Yeah.
They loved this shit.
Or the later versions of it.
Yeah, the later versions, because like I said, it had like a resurgence in the early 20th century.
A lot of that shit goes into the eugenics.
Yeah, and it was a similar kind of thing. But yeah, as I said, there was a different phrenologist who came up with the whole idea of like justifying slavery by saying, oh, Africans, their skulls show that they're quote unquote tameable, and so therefore it's okay that we subjugate them. They're fine being slaves. So yeah, all of this kind of stuff, and this was what Stephen Jay Gould's book, The Mismeasure of Man, was about, is the whole idea of biological determinism, that because you're born a certain way, that your biology determines your place in life's hierarchy, and that you should just be happy with your place because you can't improve, or you can't, you know what I mean? Which is a very pernicious idea, but there was a lot of that kind of stuff going around at this time.
Which, kind of, that's not really the truth. I mean, as long as you have a healthy birth and good nutrition and good upbringing, and there was no genetic problems with you, a person's fucking potential can be vastly improved just by nutrition and early
nutrition, education,
early childbearing,
lots of
stuff.
things.
Yeah. stable environments can change a lot of people too.
Yeah. Because we talk a lot about nature versus nurture, and
it's always a combination.
And it's always a combination.
Yeah.
Obviously your genetics do not. I mean, that's just like what you started with. I mean, you can obviously improve on that in lots of ways, and and a lot of stuff can get fucked up too, depending on the environment that you were born in.
Genetic expression is mostly just appearance, way you look, and maybe some emotional tendencies, maybe like your disposition. That might be.
Yeah, largely your.
Yeah. But environment, because genes interact with the environment a lot.
Yeah, it's a constant feedback loop, and it goes on pretty much your entire life. It's not just in childhood.
Yeah, you know what I mean. In certain races of people, they have a rougher fucking background. Like I got a lot of fucking Irish DNA in me. And fucking, which I'm gonna prove my honky fucking pedigree one of these days. I'm gonna get that damn genetic test. I'm gonna show you. But fucking, that's right. But the Irish went through a bunch of attempted genocides, a lot of fucking starvation, and the ones that made it here in the United States had a fucking pretty fucking extensive criminal history. And in the South, they were pretty fucking ill behaved. And it's all been documented, but that was just part of Southern society. A lot of that fucking was because of their ancestry. They were fucking people that are very resistant. They're defiant people, which that's a strength, because if they were complacent, they'd have been wiped out. Okay?
Well, shit, man, back in the day, they were even, the English were trying to argue that the Irish weren't white.
Yeah. Well, that would
so they could justify wiping them out.
Yeah.
So they were trying to, and phrenology was one of the things that they used to do that, among other things of a similar nature.
And surprise, the Irish are white as fuck.
That's what I was gonna say, and I can't even really think of that many people whiter than the Irish.
And African Americans, their genesis mostly was in the South of the United States, and they mixed early on with white people, and it was mostly Irish. So fucking. I remember reading in general, African Americans in the South are about 1/3 Caucasian, but it's Irish. Even like James Earl Jones, he's about 1/3 Irish. So, and a lot of the things about black culture really can be traced back to Scotland, Ireland, north of England. Even the language. A lot of people think of Ebonics as something that came from Africa. No, a lot of that's kind of like Scottish, Irish, Northern England. It's kind of like we be and they be. That's not the way pirates talked. It's like archaic northern parts of the UK. And there's a good African American historian. His name is Thomas Sowell. He'll tell you all about it. Fucking a lot of the stuff that is associated with black people is just South. That's just the way the South was. There's very little difference between white Southerners and black Southerners. It was the same culture, just different families, different family traditions, and different economic and social positions at the time. But that shit's totally changing. It's totally. I go back to Mississippi now, man. Fucking, they got some of the best black people in the world right there. Fucking helped my dad out. Fucking, they were in this town of Heidelberg. It's just the main indicator is fucking whether or not you come from a stable family or not. That's really the main indicator.
Yeah, like I said, genetics does play a part, but genetics and brains are very plastic.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like environment is a larger factor. A larger factor.
Yeah, the guy that lived across the street from my dad, Joey Tribble. I'll show you pictures of him. He married, got kids, just a real stable environment. And they're just like from Mayberry, the way they are. And he's a military guy, ex-military. Actually, he's in the reserves right now.
Can I have another drink while you're...
Yeah, I'll make
So one of the other guys that I kind of wanted to talk about briefly, who was kind of a big name in phrenology, was Samuel G. Morton. Now, he had a massive skull collection, and he was one of those dudes that again, like, collected some skulls of, like, other quote-unquote inferior races, like it was some kind of cute thing. And, yeah, so he had a bunch of those. And he was, I mean, he was a white supremacist. And like I said, I know a lot of people say, well, it was the context of the time, but not everybody was like that. You know what I mean? So, and he was pretty bad even for the time. Now, he wrote a book, which was a big book in phrenology, which is called Crania Americana, which, if you've seen the illustrations from it, pretty super racist. He did shit on black people a lot, but honestly, most of the time in the book, he was shitting on Native Americans, and again, was essentially justifying Native American genocide because Native Americans weren't good enough, or they weren't as good as white people, is essentially what he was saying. So that was like a big, huge book in phrenology. So that's the thing. So basically, what he's saying in this book is that if you get subjugated, if you get enslaved, then you deserved it, and then you just shouldn't complain about it because it's biology. Like, it's just your biology, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Like I said, biological determinism, which, as I said, is a very, very, very dangerous idea. But a lot of these people were advocating for this. Which, again, phrenology seems kind of like harmless at first blush, but when you kind of think about some of the stuff behind it, it's really not as harmless as it seems. Now, so as I said, even though phrenology kind of started going downhill in the 1840s or thereabouts, it kind of had a little bit of a resurgence in the early 20th century when kind of criminology and things like that started to come out. And at that point, too, as someone mentioned in the chat earlier, you'd get the thing where, you had a criminal skull. So if you get brought up in front of a judge and you look like a criminal, quote unquote, like you had like a big forehead or a square jaw or whatever it was, then they would obviously think you were guilty. And like I said, this is not a harmless, and I kind of feel like aspects of this are still, they still kind of leach into people's, and that thing about it is that humans are, obviously we judge people by the way they look. It's like everybody does that. You can't really help it. But the thing about it is that if you don't examine those biases, you can end up doing shit like this, where some completely innocent person gets brought in front of you as a judge, and because they look like a criminal, oh, well, they must have done it. Look at their head. You know what I mean? And then they get hanged and they didn't do shit. You know what I mean? So again, you really have to kind of be careful this kind of fucking thinking, because obviously the shape of your head has absolutely nothing to do with, or how tall or short you are, or what your nose looks like, or anything like that. It has nothing to do with, like, if you murdered somebody, and it's just fucking crazy to think that. But yeah, so there was a resurgence in the early 19th century. Also, fun fact, and sorry, this is kind of a bummer, but phrenology was also indirectly responsible for the Rwandan genocide. So that's great. Yeah, because what happened, there was a phrenologist named Paul Boutz, I think is how you pronounce his last name, in Belgium. And he actually combined phrenology with a couple of other pseudosciences, including graphology, which I think is that's handwriting analysis, which is also kind of bullshit. And so he started this whole thing. Now, he was a Roman Catholic priest, and he was kind of one of the guys that spearheaded the resurgence of phrenology in Belgium. Now, his work was still very popular in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, the Belgians were in Rwanda, and they used phrenology to differentiate the Hutus and the Tutsis. Because they liked the Tutsis better, they used phrenology to say that the Tutsis were racially superior to the Hutus. And they even had a thing, because prior to that, I think there had been like a little bit of animosity between the tribes, but not really. Like, they had still like intermarried and, shit like that. But after this, they decided, no, these are very, like, racially distinct categories using phrenology, like their skull shapes, and they issued ID cards to them saying what race they were, and you couldn't move, you know what I mean? So because they liked the Tutsis better, that kind of justified the Tutsis wiping out between 500,000 and 800,000 Tutsis, as well as 10,000 Twa, which was another tribe there. So phrenology was, I don't want, like, directly responsible for that, because the Belgians in the 30s did absolutely use phrenology to differentiate these two tribes, which were really not that different. But they made it seem different, and then over the years it built up, and obviously in 1994 there was a huge genocide. So that's special. So like I said, not fucking harmless, these kind of ideas. You know. So, like, because that's the thing. Like we were saying before, it's not untrue to say that different races, well, race is like not, from a biological point of view, race doesn't really mean anything. I read that certain groups of chimpanzees, for example, in parts of Africa, have more genetic variation than the entire human race. Because the human race went through a bottleneck about 200,000 years ago. So all humans, no matter how different they look from one another, are very, very, very genetically similar. More genetically similar than chimpanzees that live in the same region of Africa, is what we're saying.
In other words, they have more genetic diversity than humans.
Yeah. Like I said, humans are very similar, even though, and really the differences in our appearance are very, very surface level. Are very surface level.
Well, it's about climate.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Wherever we ended up, we just adapted to that climate better. That's pretty much the only thing. You know, and nutrition and things like that also play a factor, but it's, so the fact that you would extrapolate that certain races are superior to others because of these tiny, tiny differences is just horrific and wrong. It's just wrong. You know, it's scientifically incorrect.
You're basing supremacy on appearances that were mostly based about on climate, and you know what I mean. So back in the day, you could say that an African was superior to a white person on the African plains back when you had to stay as cool as you possibly could with running down animals.
Yeah.
So they were better at that. Each race was basically specialized for their environment. That's all it was.
Yeah, and like I said, the differences were really not that, and they only happened within the last 200,000 years or so.
Less, I think. Some of them more like past 20, past 10. Some of it, because I think Asians changed a lot recently. Like when I say recent, like I'm talking about like 10,000 years maybe, because they had organized societies based on rice farming, and they ended up inheriting a bunch of genes that allowed them to digest rice a lot better.
Yeah, and people say the same thing about like lactose intolerance, or you know, some races are more susceptible to disease than others. Yeah. Like, you know, people of African descent are more you know, are more prone to get, like, say, sickle cell anemia.
Yeah.
You know, Ashkenazi Jews are more prone to get Tay-Sachs disease.
Yeah, it's real high IQs in general.
That is actually not true. Steven Pinker wrote a thing about that, because I read the book where he talked about that, but that has since been debunked.
I heard they had the highest IQ average is like 115.
Yeah, he did talk about that in his book, because I read that years ago.
This is bullshit, huh?
It's been largely debunked. It depends on, as most things, because I was kind of reading a thing about IQ and how a lot of people are like, oh, well, you know, like that book that came out in the 90s, The Bell Curve, where they tried to argue that there's these big differences in IQ between races, and that means like white people are smarter or whatever.
No, I remember that. It said that Asians were smarter.
Well, white people and Asians were smarter than all the other races. That's what
but the Asians smarter than everybody.
Right, but the thing about it, though, is that a lot of the arguments that they made in that were pretty specious, because they're trying to they're trying to make a comparison between like shit that I said earlier, that some diseases, for example, are more prevalent in certain races than others. But the argument is that it's like, well, yeah, but that's just like one gene mutation. Intelligence, which is supposedly what IQ measures, which that's a whole other discussion, which we should probably do a show about, because that's just making everything like down to a number. They're like, IQ intelligence is a lot more complicated than that. We don't even know how many genes that involves. So the fact that you're trying to say, and there have been studies too, that environment plays a huge, huge role in IQ. There was a study done, like a longitudinal study in Kenya, I believe it was. And I think it happened from 84 to 98, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But the Kenyan children, the average IQ over that time period in Kenyan children went up more than 26 points. It wasn't because of genetics, obviously. It was because of better education, better nutrition, better parental literacy. Yeah. So it was all environmental factors that caused that increase. And if you study for an IQ test, you can raise your score, which means that it's not innate.
Chances are, if you look at science and biology, and I fucking know how to train animals and human beings. Chances are, if the upbringings and the nutrition and the birth quality is the same, you're going to have about the same. Doesn't matter the race.
Exactly. And that's what they're arguing. There's people have propensities.
Yeah. Now there are fucking different types of intelligence though too.
Well, yeah. That's why it's so complicated to break that down.
Yeah, and in the idea of inferiority and superiority between intellects is fucking kind of odd, because look, a chimpanzee, which can't do a lot of the things that a human can do, a chimpanzee can remember a series of symbols
better than a human,
just over and over again. Their memories are just a lot better.
Yeah, they're better at that than we are.
They can do a lot of shit
That's just
that
true.
A human can't do. But a human can do a lot of things that they can't do, But they can't really grasp speech that well. They can understand speech to a certain level, but I think concepts like abstract concepts, they're probably not going to be able to handle.
Well, and physiologically, they don't have the mechanics to speak either.
Right. But they can remember like over and over again, it's like fucking shapes.
Yeah, like huge strings of...
Huge, like 15 different shapes
way more
in
than
a
a
row.
person
They can remember it without committing it to memory. They just automatically remember it. And they can do it on a little touchpad that they've tested them on. They can remember... I can't remember a 15...
I think the average for a person is 7.
Like 7, yeah. They can do like 15 or more.
Like numbers or shapes.
Numbers or fucking
like
shapes.
That you can hold in your head at one time before you start forgetting shit.
So
Some people remember more, obviously, but I think the average is 7.
It's because they specialized into fucking remembering where shit was put and hidden.
Yeah, they had to.
Better memory, pattern recognition and stuff.
So, like I said, that's environmental because that's...
Well, no, it's genetic.
Well, it is, but I mean, that's because that's what they needed. That's what they needed.
Yeah. Chimpanzees that couldn't do that didn't survive.
Victor said, I read in the 50 or so years people have been using sign language with apes, the apes have never asked a single question.
No, that's not true. I've seen them ask questions.
Yeah, I thought they had too.
Yeah.
If I remember. I'd have to go back and look, but...
That fucking one gorilla asking questions about the cat. Asking questions of, who's this?
Oh my god, that always makes me so sad.
Seeing pictures of other apes and like, who's that?
Yeah, that ape that had that gorilla that had that kitten.
Yeah.
All ball.
Yeah. Well, they're also, I've seen, I've seen monkeys with tablets and phones running it, looking at pictures of other monkeys.
Yeah.
Now those don't have sign language, but I've seen orangutans react to people in zoos. Which the guy does a magic trick for a young orangutan female, and she realizes he did a magic trick. She laughs her
Holy
ass off.
shit!
It disappeared. So they can do a lot.
Well, the fact that she's laughing shows that she knows that's a trick.
She knew it was a trick. Yeah,
that it didn't really disappear.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some pretty higher level, because we've said
Right.
this about Pookie before. She's got like some pretty higher level
Yeah.
thought going on. She can
Yeah.
try to deceive
Yeah, she lies.
people. Yeah. Like, so that takes a lot of brain power.
She manipulates too.
Yeah.
She knows what I'm going to do if she does something. Like if I smack this right here, he'll come and try to stop me, and then we'll wrestle.
Yeah, she's got like
Yeah.
a whole system worked
Yeah.
out. She's got a whole system worked out. But yeah, so I don't know. I just kind of feel like the thing about because I know the bell curve was a real big thing in the 90s, and it was just kind of like, and a lot of people use that to again justify saying, oh, whites and Asians were superior to other races because they were smarter. But the thing about it is, you can't, in a lot of ways, you can't really quantify intelligence because, like I said, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence. The IQ test, which has its own problems, you know, even if it was applied in a way that was, you know, equal for everybody, it still only really measures a very specific kind of intelligence, a problem-solving intelligence. It doesn't measure any other kind of intelligence, which a lot of people have. So to me, it just seems like, I don't know. Again, it just seems very pop psychology to me. It's like it makes people feel better if they're like, oh, I have an IQ of this number or whatever, but it doesn't really mean much of anything.
Yeah.
You know, yes, people that score higher on this test tend to be more intelligent in some ways.
Look, man, look, when I was fucking living in Boston, in the club scene, I would go down to Cambridge Square a lot, where fucking, you know, MIT and Harvard was, and they had some dudes that were fucking geniuses. They were young guys. One of them I'm thinking of in particular was a young guy who, at that time, he had a fucking experiment going on the space shuttle. I couldn't stand to be around that dude, man. He had no fucking social skills at all. He was extremely annoying and couldn't get laid for the love of... He couldn't get laid in a Mexican brothel, okay? And if he showed up to the club, he was just a fucking disaster. He was intelligent on certain ways, but he had no social intelligence at all.
Well, I kind of feel like that happens a lot with like
he was
super
just,
intelligent.
Yeah,
not always, but
you just couldn't stand to be around him. It was like fucking somebody grinding their fucking nails along a chalkboard just to be around that guy. He was just extremely annoying and super bad social skills.
Yeah,
and he wasn't pretending to be a nerd. He was a fucking nerd on a genetic level. And he was just something that a company could fucking throw in a corner and he could solve some kind of problem and they'd send him a bunch of money. That's all he did. But a dude like that could never really like make it in a social scene. He didn't have the social intelligence.
Well, that's the thing. Like I said, that's what I mean when I say there's different kinds of intelligence, because some people are like, you know, very socially intelligent.
Yeah.
You know, which I'm not terrible at that, but I'm not great at that either. You're much better at that than I am. You know?
Man, I've seen the extremes where just nobody wants to be around the dude.
Yeah, I've known some people like that in my time.
No, it's like being around a fucking severely autistic person. But
well, that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Honestly.
No, it wasn't that, because my cousin is severely autistic. Fucking, it's like that, but no, it's a normal person per se. I think he was still in the normal range. Like I said, if you were to analyze him, I probably wouldn't say he was mentally ill. Autism is a mental illness, basically. It's a handicap. He had a handicap, but it was all just because his intellect was fucking all being used at a certain narrow band spectrum. And social decorum and human engineering and charm were nowhere near. He just couldn't do that. Dude just couldn't be charming at all. Or likable.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I've known some dumb people like that too.
Yeah,
so.
There are dumb people like that. But this is a super smart dude.
Likability is a whole different metric.
Yeah. I felt like he was running the wheels off me whenever he was around.
Actually, to be honest,
how annoying he was.
I've known more dumb people that were
like
a chore to be around than intelligent people that were a chore to be around. But I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I have known a couple people like that too. But honestly, most people that I know that are like a pain in the ass to be around are dumb people.
Yeah.
Jeffy Art says, watching orangutans react to babies and children at a zoo always warms my heart. I know, we watch those videos all the time. I love that. Victor said, Alex the gray parrot is the only animal that's ever asked a question. He asked what color he was. Dude, I read the book about Alex the parrot that his caretaker wrote. I fucking bawled like a baby at the end of that shit because he died.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
What color was he? Green?
Gray.
Gray. Okay.
He was gray.
He didn't know what color that was.
Well, he just, I guess,
Okay.
like, he asked what color it was. But that, I have that book around here somewhere. Like, I should read that to you, that book. It made me cry at the end when he died. Because he died, like, suddenly.
Mm.
Like, they just came in one morning and he was dead. And they couldn't figure out what, and it's just like, I was like, that's, like, the worst. And I knew it was going to happen because he was famous. So it's like, I knew that happened. But still, like, after all the shit, because he was, like, super, super smart. I love, like, shit about, I have a bunch of books about ravens and crows and stuff like that, too, because they're also super intelligent. But yeah, so again, phrenology, even though it was used to justify all this horrible shit, I will say that some of the proponents did have some good ideas about stuff. Now, some people that were into phrenology were obviously big advocates of slavery, because of course they were. But some of them were abolitionists too, like for completely different reasons. Another thing is a lot of them wanted prison reforms because they were saying, well, if we can tell by the bumps on your skull, which obviously you can't, who's like the worst of the worst, like some of the ones that were just like a little bit criminal and could be educated to be different, like, you know, we could just have them in jail for a little while and educate them and then let them out and then they'll be fine because we've taught them to not be like that. Whereas like the ones that have like the super big bumps in the murder area or whatever, we can just leave them in forever. So they were advocating for like a more I guess a more like a less punitive kind of system, like a prison system, and also advocating for better mental health, which like I said is good. They were doing it for stupid reasons, but I mean at least their heart was in the right place, I guess. But yeah, so as I said, it kind of started going downhill in the 1840s, and then it kind of had a resurgence in the early 1900s. However, and I did not really realize this until I started researching this show, and someone mentioned, I think Ben mentioned it like very early on in the show, but for whatever reason, not so much phrenology, but the very similar pseudoscience physiognomy, which is, you know, telling your personality by your facial features, has exploded on TikTok, except it's called face reading. So everybody's doing that shit nowadays, and it's a little bit problematic, I'm gonna say. Some of the videos not so much, but it does really seem like they're getting into a quagmire that they don't really know the historical context of. And so it's like kind of funny like watching it, because I'm just kind of like, do you guys even know where this came from, or like what the whole shit was?
Who knows?
It
It might have been put on there by somebody who did know what it came from.
Well, yeah,
There's
but
lots
maybe.
of fucking psychological warfare going on.
Oh, I know that.
To make divisions about.
Well, and one of the things too was that somebody put up some hilarious shit like that was kind of like phrenology. They were making a comparison between angel skull, which of course was like a pretty girl skull,
Yeah.
and witch skull, which of course was like someone with a big nose,
Yeah, yeah.
and like a chin like that. Looked
Yeah.
a little bit, like a little racist. It was a little
Yeah.
racist. But so yeah, the fact that they're making that judgment
Yeah.
of angel skull and witch skull
Yeah,
is like
a
this whole thing.
Look, just a lot of the shit that you're gonna see on the internet that's fucking real divisive and people get fucking pent up about and everything. And there'll be Americans in there fucking doing it and arguing in the comment section. If you were to actually trace that shit back, it's probably coming from, in some cases, like an enemy state, like fucking China. Because they have whole psychological warfare fucking units that fucking do things just like fucking shit posting all the time. And then the shit posting starts Americans to shit post. And
Yeah.
they could just let that shit just fucking
Fester.
roll downhill.
Sure.
And it just festers because...
That's why I don't get outraged
Don't
about
get outraged
shit
by
you see.
anything because you don't know where the original thing fucking started from.
Because honestly, most of the stuff that's like real egregious, that's just like made. It's like designed to make you mad.
It's designed to make you mad, and
Don't
you're
get
not
mad.
sure where it originally came from. And information warfare has been happening forever. They called it propaganda. But now that the internet's out there, fucking state players, non-state actors, terrorist groups, fucking anybody can fucking make a sensation on the internet and divide the people to make them easier to fucking destroy because they're not unified. So if something makes you mad, chances are it's information warfare. It was probably designed to do that.
That's not worry too much about.
Yeah.
I just keep on scrolling.
Yeah.
To be like, whatever.
You
bro.
learn that fucking when you're in the military. If something's designed to make... If you get mad when you see something or read something, it's probably propaganda designed to make you mad for a reason.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it's better to just not give a shit about
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, I'm not saying be apathetic. I'm just saying that understand that
Understand
is
what it is. That's what
engineered
it is. Right.
to make you upset.
Right. And you can't... And a lot of times you don't blame the person who made the video. They're repeating something that they heard. This is like 5th generation fucking shit posting.
Yeah, you have to look at where that idea originated.
Where it originated from, right.
One thing that I had written down, just as a kind of thing, was one of my very favorite quotes, which is from H.L. Mencken. One of my very favorite quotes in the whole world. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what this is. But yeah, so, what I was saying before about the shit on TikTok, it kind of started out, because it's kind of like the beauty quote-unquote influencers also. They have a filter on TikTok, which measures your quote-unquote canthal tilt, which is how your eyes are, and it's this little red line that goes across your eyes. And it's supposed to say, like if you have eyes that, what is it, that like kind of point up or like kind of point down toward your nose, that's supposed to be super good because that's like hunter eyes. That's what they call that. Yeah, and that's like supposed to be more effective. Yeah. And if like they're kind of down like that, that's like prey eyes.
Or they're round.
Which is not good. Yeah, or something like that. And those, like I said, and I think Ben brought this up earlier, it kind of comes from there's this whole weird, I don't want to do a show about this because I don't want to get into that quagmire, but the whole transvestigation thing where people are just
transvestigation, that was funny.
For some reason, like bothered, and they think everybody is secretly trans.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, like you don't have anything better to do with your time, I guess.
I got to stand up and support the transvestigation.
No, you don't.
That shit was so fucking funny. And you're not gonna see it on like fucking YouTube. They take the shit down, but you can go on like BitChute, and they had dudes making these videos trying to convince you that some beautiful female celebrity is actually a biological male. But they were hilarious. I thought they were hilarious. I thought it was like a lark. Like, I never really
but, like, why would you even waste your time watching that? It just seems
kind of like the old internet of the 90s, where dudes would come up with these crazy theories, you know?
I'm not interested in anything like that.
I would just laugh when I'd watch some of those.
Because if I see something like that, I'm like, please get a hobby.
Like, you'd have a dude trying to fucking
like a better hobby than this, I mean.
They'd have a dude, and he'd spend 20 minutes trying to convince you that Uma Thurman was a biological male. You know what I mean? And they would just pull out. And
then you're like, for what purpose? For what purpose are all these people trying to fool you about what their gender is?
They never really got into that.
Well, of course not.
Never really got into
they
that.
Don't, because they're just trying to...
I never took any of it seriously. I just thought it was funny. You know,
it's just like a really weird...
You know, Uma Thurman is not a fucking biological male. It's a woman.
But it just seems like a really weird thing to focus on. It seems like a weird thing to care about.
It would just be vague shit like it's to deceive you. It's to break you down and deceive you. I always fucking thought by my reading of the channel, it was either like a lark or the dude was kind of like mentally ill.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that second
thing. Mentally ill, and that he thinks that everyone's trying to make him gay, which makes it even funnier to me. You know what I mean? I'm not sympathetic.
That is funny.
Yeah, I'm not really sympathetic. People can believe what they want to believe, and this shit's fucking hilarious. Even if it's wrong,
although I feel bad,
I'll enjoy it.
I feel bad laughing at other people's mental illness.
I think what it was,
but
the one that I subscribed to that I would listen to, he had a relaxing voice, but I could, and the videos were funny to me. You know, I think he was slightly paranoid, schizophrenic, or delusional in some way.
Yeah.
He thought people were trying to make him gay. That's what I think it was.
Well, see, that's what I suspect. There was an international
conspiracy to make him gay. And so I'm like, either that or the whole thing was just a lark. I don't know.
I kind of suspect, well, I don't know. Like, it could go either way.
Yeah.
But I kind of, usually when I see those, which I try to avoid them because, like, I don't have it just gives me a headache, all that kind of stuff.
It's a dude thing.
It's not funny. It's just kind of pitiful.
It's a dude thing. Dudes like that shit.
And it's just, funny. I guess, but like I said, it's just pitiful and it's not really funny.
I thought it was hilarious.
But Like, if they're shit posting, it's not funny, and if they're mentally ill, it's also not funny. So it's just kind of like, it's just not funny.
Well, think about this, man. That's fucking hilarious. The dude thinks there's an international conspiracy.
Right, but like I said,
all these
he
celebrities
should probably be medicated
and all
then.
these famous people, and they're out there trying to make him gay.
He's
That's
out there.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
but see, the thing that bothers me about is that obviously that dude needs help. Like, he's gonna go out and fucking shoot up a place one of these days. That's not right.
Nah.
You shouldn't be walking around like that.
They got all different kinds.
With those kind of fucking delusions.
Some dudes are crazy.
If you really do believe that, please get help.
But he may have not have actually believed that. I
hope
don't know.
not. But I know there are some people
I
that
considered
do.
it to be art.
Well, here's the thing. Well,
art,
and the thing about it, and like I said, people with paranoid schizophrenia, they can't help it, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's kind of one of the things, is they think that it's a weird... I don't want to say narcissistic because they don't mean it, but they think that like the whole world like revolves around them, I guess. So it's just like everything in the world is like a conspiracy against them somehow.
Against them,
Like I said, that is a mental illness.
If they're being gang stalked.
Please get help with that.
They're being gang stalked at an international
If you
level.
literally think that celebrities are all secretly trans as a big plot to make you specifically gay,
that's awesome.
Please
That's
see a therapist because you really need help.
That's quite a concept.
And if you're making whole half-hour videos about it, please find a better use of your time, because it's not cute. It's just not, I don't know. I find it kind of sad, actually. It's kind of sad.
I'm sardonic. I kind of enjoy this.
I am too, but I don't really like laughing at people with mental illnesses that
But he was
severe.
making entertaining videos, man. I was just entertaining. And I didn't really care whether or not he was crazy or if he was bullshit.
But so that's the thing,
I was just like, yeah, okay, man.
So that's kind of a big thing. So I kind of feel like there's sort of an overlap with the physiognomy resurgence on TikTok, and there's an overlap with the transvestigation. There's also an overlap with the incel community because of their whole looks maxing thing. Which to me it's kind of similar, but looks maxing. Please forgive me, I'm no fan of incels, believe me, but
come on,
because they're insufferable. But also, it's just like they're not saying. It's not necessarily physiognomy because they're not saying, well, you can tell your personality by your facial features necessarily. Right. I think some of them maybe say that. But they're just trying to say, well, I don't know. Like, incels are usually, like, pretty defeatist. They'll be like, oh, well, if you have a weak chin, it's all over for you, bro. It's like, it's that kind of shit.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me clean this up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Jenny is talking about the incels that she's talking about. Really, if you look at what's happening on the world on a global scale, the average guy's an incel. He can't. He's living in India or some fucking place where he's working in a damn mine shaft. He's got no fucking money, and fucking women aren't interested in that dude. Women are not interested in the average dude. They are only interested the breeding women. In other words, the young, good-looking ones that want to have kids and shit, or the ones that guys want. They're only looking at the top 20%. It's called hypergamy. The average guy is invisible to them. Kind of like how the average 40-year-old or 50-year-old woman is invisible to the young guy. It's like they're not even there. Okay. So just because a guy is an incel doesn't mean he's some kind of criminal or that he's got bad intent or anything. What she's talking about is
I just said they were insufferable.
She's just talking about the incels that get on there and fucking talk all kinds of shit.
Whine.
Right. That's what she's talking about.
Anybody that is on anybody that's on social media completely whining all the time about how miserable their life is, whatever they're whining about is not.
My heart goes out to most of the incels. The average guy, man, it's fucking life's hard for them. Their job and their status in life, and the women aren't really fucking. That you're not what they're looking for. Your only hope is to get in there and fucking become something. You got to become something. All right. And that takes effort. Some dudes don't even want to they just check out their black pill. I ain't gonna do nothing. I'm gonna sit around and get fat. Fuck it. Okay. Well, you're gonna reap what you sow. That's defeatist.
Like I said, if you want to do that, that's your choice. But don't fucking cry about it.
Yeah, don't cry about it. If you're gonna cry about it, you're gonna be like that dude. Who's that dude?
Who? Elliot Rodgers.
Elliot Rodgers. Yeah, that was the ultimate. That was the ultimate violent or crazy incel. You don't want to be like that. But I don't think he was a normal incel.
You don't want to be like Elliot Rodgers. Pro tip.
No. That wasn't a normal...
Please don't do that.
That dude was not a normal incel. That dude was some kind of a psychopathic kind of...
some kind of psychopath. Yeah, we did a show.
He was an incel, but he was also psychopathic and fucking probably like slightly autistic. There is something not right about it. You know, most dudes don't react that way.
I don't know. It's just kind of like, I don't... Like I said...
If you...
The thing... Okay, so the thing
you don't
about...
want to be celibate, you can't attract a woman, make money, fucking seek the help of a professional.
Well,
In
like
other
I
words,
said...
fucking get a call girl.
And the thing about it is that, you know, we focus a lot on incels, like dudes and stuff like that, but people seem to forget that, like, women...
There are women incels.
Also have that problem if they're not hot or anything like that. Like, they also have the same issues.
Yeah, those incels aren't looking at that.
Of course. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying.
They're
I'm
only looking at the fucking...
Right, exactly.
Top women.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Well,
So-
okay, an incel will go with the average woman. They won't go with a below average woman unless he's resolved it within himself. But a lot of the ones that are trouble that you're talking about, like Elliot Rogers, they want fucking above average women. Those are all taken.
I mean, generally.
In general.
Well, yeah, see, I mean, that's the problem is that they think they're... the problem is the entitlement. They think they're entitled, no matter what they look like or what their personality is like.
Right.
They think they're entitled to the hottest of the hot.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, well... Why don't you just, like, be normal and just, like, meet a normal fucking person and maybe you'll like that person and just be normal.
My friend Saad from Saudi Arabia, you know, we were talking about some of the same shit. You know, you got guys in Saudi Arabia, even though that's an Islamic country, to get a good wife, you need family connections and you got to be something. That woman is not going to go, you can't be a fucking loser, you know, to get married there. But they got some of these countries that are real backwards down there where these guys don't have anything. They don't look like anything. And they think that women are kind of below them. And therefore they're God's gift to women. So they see some woman and they go, oh, I'll marry you. Well, let's get married. And when she doesn't get married, not interested in him, he's very confused about it. He's explaining because they're used to the world that they come from. You know, very rural, real religious. And the parents arrange the marriage. And if they see some Western woman on TikTok crying about, oh, I can't find a man, he thinks, well, oh, shit, I'll take you. I'm a man. Well, yeah, the thing is that...
It doesn't really work that way.
It doesn't work that way. She's a fucking 8 and you're a fucking 3, okay? She's not talking about you. She's talking about she wants a fucking hot dude with fucking abs who's 6 feet tall and got a big dick and a whole bunch of fucking money in his hand. Somebody's charming. That's what she's talking about. She's not talking about a goat herder from Afghanistan who's fucking 5'4" and fucking 100 pounds. That's not what she's talking about with the hair all fucked up. No, that's not what she's talking about. You got nothing to offer her. That's an alien concept. So incel means a bunch of different things, but most dudes are incels in the world.
I'm just going to say that, because the thing about it, I don't necessarily, and I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding the whole looks maxing thing. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, as long as you're saying, well, these are the features that I have. How are the... You know, what are the ways that I can best present those so they would look the best? It's the same kind of thing as, like, I'm going to wear clothes that flatter my body style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You work with what you got. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong. Yeah. But I kind of feel like the problem arises when you start, like, shading over into, one, this kind of defeatist attitude where it's like, oh, I have a weak chin. I'm just going to be a virgin forever, which obviously that's dumb. And like I said, when you get into, like, the face reading thing where you think, oh, well, I have a nose like this, so I'm, like, screwed forever because that means whatever about my personality, which, like I said, is like physiognomy.
No, there's always character, way you look, your fucking sexual magnetism.
Like I said, it's
and
all...
nose jobs. You can get nose job, too.
Well, like I said, it's all... Yeah. It's a package.
Yeah.
If you're a person, even if you're a good-looking person, because Elliot Rogers, since we brought him up before, was not a bad-looking dude. He was a regular-looking... He had some money, like, you know what I mean? But he was... Yeah, like, his whole personality, though, was so off-putting that every woman that he met was like, no, thank you. Justifiably so. Yeah. Because he was a fucking weirdo. And they could sense that.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily looks. Yes, looks help. Yes, money helps. But it's like, it's never the whole story. You kind of need a whole... And if you don't have certain things, if you're not the best looking person in the world, if you don't have all the money in the world, then you can compensate in other ways. Like if you have a really good personality, you're really funny or something like that, it's just kind of like you can do just fine. If you're not doomed. I kind of feel like the thing that pisses me off about the incels is they're always whining about, I don't have XYZ jawline or whatever the fuck. or I have the wrong canthal tilt, and so I'm just doomed to be a virgin forever, which is stupid.
Well,
that's stupid.
A lot of them fucking look at it the wrong way.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
They think that if they're fucking 6 feet tall, got a six-pack, a big dick, and a fucking bunch of money, and they got a fucking fantastic face, that's going to guarantee you a woman. No, that'll guarantee you your foot in the door. But once you're in there, fucking, if you say or do the wrong thing, you're going to be fucking
You're
eliminated.
still out.
You're out.
That's what I mean. It's
just an easier way to get your foot into the door. That's all it is.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say that people that aren't 6 feet tall or aren't good looking or something like that, they do have a harder time initially.
Yeah.
But if you have a really good personality, I don't think you're going to struggle once you get in there. Because like you said, even dudes that are tall and good looking and shit like that, they can still be assholes and still get rejected.
Yeah. I'm fucking short. I'm 5'6", Jen will attest, because fucking she's seen me in action before we were a fucking thing. I had no problem with women.
Yeah, none at all.
None at all.
Tom has never had a problem.
Nope. And tall ones were easier to get than the short ones, because tall women are at a disadvantage. They can't find a guy their height. And tall guys like them don't want them. They want the fucking short girls.
Yeah.
So, no, if she's like close to 6 feet tall, I'd walk away with it if I wanted it, usually. But you gotta fucking, they're people. You know what I mean? So, you might not like her. That's the reason why I didn't do it, you know. But, no, I've had tall girlfriends in the past. You know, like 6 feet. Now I fucking look tiny next to them. But it doesn't matter, man. I feel like a big game hunter.
Like I said, I think that's a much healthier attitude.
Yeah. Look what I got.
You know, there's some things about yourself you can change, and there's some things that you can't really change.
Yeah.
So the things that you can't change, you just kind of have to learn to live with it and use it to your advantage to the extent that you're able.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all you can do.
Yeah, and fucking, I'll tell you what, as a short guy, tall women have it much harder than short guys. Much harder.
They do.
Yeah, if you're a woman and you're 6 foot tall, man, it's fucking rough.
I told you, one of my friends in high school was 6'1".
Yeah,
Man,
and
she
it's
had
a shame.
bitch
Man,
of a time.
It's a shame. They got good women that size. They're fucking pretty. They're just tall and big. But you gotta be a fucking man. Reach down, and grab your nuts. Fucking, she's a woman like any other woman. You give her a chance. You know, like what kind of shit is that? Just because you feel like, well, I don't want to look short next to her. Man, fuck you. You ain't all that anyway.
Exactly. See, that's what I mean. And you have to like keep your ego in check. Also, I think that's the kind of thing. And a lot of dudes have a problem with that because like dudes' egos are very fragile. In general. Yeah. So it's like I can't. Man, I knew dudes that wouldn't even sit next to each other in the movie theater. They'd go with their friend to go see a movie, and they had to leave a seat between.
Yeah, I think I would probably do that though. I've never done that. I never went to the movies with like a.
I was like, literally, no one is worried about that, bro. But, it's just like I was like, now we're thinking about it because you left a seat.
Well, no, it wouldn't be a problem at the Dolby Theater. Those are some pretty big fucking lazy.
I love the Dolby seats.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
Would you really?
What's that?
You wouldn't sit next to, like, if you just went...
No, fucking... Which the thing is bros would fucking be political about it. You'd put all your popcorn and shit in the fucking seat between you. Probably how that would happen.
Okay, well, I could see that.
Probably that would happen.
But like I said, if two dudes sat next to each other in the movie theater, I literally... nothing would occur to me.
What happens if I fucking put my arm around the back of the guy's...
Well, then I'd be like, oh, okay.
Okay. You'd pull out the camera, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't be bothered one bit. But like I said, dudes that leave a seat between, now I'm kind of like, oh, someone's insecure.
Yeah.
You're drawing more attention
to it.
If you just sat next to each other like normal ass friends, no one would think a single thing about it.
What if one dude sits in front and the other one fucking like the seat behind? See, you're not even in the same row.
Okay, so that's a little weird.
So you're seeing it together, but separately.
You're like, what, is he want to flick boogers at the back of his head? What's going on? I would just think they weren't together at that point. Like, they were just two separate people. That's what I would think. But yeah, so... It's just, I don't know. This whole thing, this was a fascinating topic, actually. But
it seemed like a lot of people didn't like it. They're not in here.
It did make me sad that...
They voted on it, though.
Remnants of it are still going on.
Yeah.
To this day and age.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like maybe younger people don't know the historical context of it and shit like that. So it's just kind of like, can we just not? Can we not do this again?
Forget about it anyway.
Can we not do this again? Well, yeah, maybe it just might be just a trend.
It's a trend.
They'll forget about it in a little while, I guess. I hope, because it's kind of fucked up. Kind of fucked up. All right, so I guess we're gonna wrap it up. It's
All right, you hungry?
yeah, starving.
Yo, I got some of that korma left.
Ooh, korma.
Yeah, I'll heat it up.
All right, so we're gonna wrap it up for this evening. Thanks everybody for dropping by. Hope you found this topic interesting. I certainly did. But yeah, so we'll be back on Friday night for the sidetrack show. We'll have some drinks, talk about some bullshit, probably have the sex doll up for everybody to look at with her new wig. It's pink. It's pretty. So yeah, you guys can see that. But yeah, so again, have a good rest of your evening, you guys. And and we'll see you guys again on Friday night. Good night.